What's good, everyone? This is Arcane Paradox, and boy do we have a treat for you. What if Harry used the Potter will to expose Dursleys and the entire ministry turned against Dumbledore? Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Stone That Watches. The letter came on a Tuesday. Harry knew it was a Tuesday because Dudley had football practice on Tuesdays, which meant the morning was quieter than usual. No deliberate shoulder checks in the hallway, no dramatic sighing at the breakfast table about how much space Harry was taking up simply by existing. Just Uncle Vernon behind his newspaper and Aunt Petunia scraping burnt toast over the sink, and the ordinary grey light of a July morning pushing through the kitchen window like it didn't particularly want to be there either. The owl arrived at 7:14 a.m., which Harry knew because Uncle Vernon's watch was directly in his eye line when the bird hit the window with a sound like someone had thrown a textbook at it. Aunt Petunia screamed. The toast went into the sink. Uncle Vernon's newspaper crumpled in his fists, and Harry was already at the window, unlatching it, letting the tawny owl tumble inside with the graceless dignity of something that had been flying all night and was deeply unimpressed with everyone in the room. The letter it dropped on the kitchen table was thick. Heavy. Sealed with deep red wax stamped with an H. Harry picked it up before Uncle Vernon could reach for it. "Boy, it's addressed to me," Harry said. He turned it over. The front read, in ink the color of old copper, Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. And beneath that, in smaller letters, from the Office of Admissions, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry had no idea what Hogwarts was. He had no idea what witchcraft and wizardry meant in any context that applied to him. But he looked at Aunt Petunia when he read it aloud, and her face did something he had never seen it do before. It went completely, absolutely still. Like someone had pressed pause on a person. That was the moment he knew the letter mattered. What followed was noise. There was always noise when something important happened at number 4, noise designed to fill up space, to crowd out questions, to make the important thing seem less important through sheer volume of distraction. Uncle Vernon shouted. Aunt Petunia made tea she didn't drink. Dudley came home early from football and immediately sensed the tension the way animals sense earthquakes, retreating to the living room with a packet of biscuits and the television turned up loud. Harry sat with the letter in his lap and waited for the noise to stop. It took 3 days and approximately 40 more letters before it did. By the time a man the size of a small building bent himself through the front door of the beach hut on the rock in the sea, Harry had read his original letter so many times that he had it memorized. And when the enormous man, Hagrid, Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, sat down and said, "Happy birthday, Harry, you're a wizard," Harry's first thought was not disbelief. His first thought was, so that's what she was afraid of. Diagon Alley arrived like a fever dream after a lifetime of grey. Harry walked through it with his head up and his eyes moving, trying to absorb everything at once, the shops piled on top of each other, the robes and the cauldrons and the owls and their cages, the people who moved through it all like it was ordinary, because for them it was. A woman in emerald robes haggling over a set of brass scales. 2 boys about Harry's age arguing over something in a shop window. An old man asleep on a bench with a copy of the Daily Prophet sliding off his knee. Harry kept pace with Hagrid and said very little. He was busy. He was building a map. Not of the alley, though he was doing that too. He was building a map of what he didn't know, because the shape of the unknown is always more useful than you'd think. He didn't know magic. He didn't know the rules. He didn't know who the players were or what they wanted from him, because something about the way people looked at him in the alley, the way they stopped and stared and whispered to each other after he passed, told him clearly that people wanted something from him. He just didn't know what yet. Gringotts came into view at the end of the street, white marble, columns, brass doors, and Harry looked up at it and thought, this is where answers live. He was more right than he knew. The inside of Gringotts was exactly what it wanted to be, enormous, marble-floored, slightly intimidating in the way that institutions are when they have been powerful for a very long time and see no particular reason to apologize for it. The goblins behind the long counter moved through their work with a focused efficiency that Harry found immediately more respectful than the performative business of, say, Uncle Vernon's insurance office, which he had visited once and found deeply unconvincing. Hagrid moved to the nearest free counter and launched into his explanation, something about the Hogwarts letter, something about Vault 687, and Harry stood beside him and watched the other goblins. He was watching them because they were watching him. Not the way the people in the alley had watched him. Not with awe or whispered reverence. With something more careful than that. A goblin 3 positions down the counter had looked up from his ledger when Harry walked in and had not looked back down. He was older than the others, or at least he looked it, his face carrying the particular weight of someone who had decided long ago that patience was not a virtue so much as a strategy. He met Harry's eyes when Harry looked at him directly, and he did not look away. Most adults looked away when Harry looked at them directly. The Dursleys had trained that out of him by the time he was 5, look at the floor, boy, don't stare, who do you think you are? Harry had spent years relearning the habit of meeting people's eyes. He was still getting used to the fact that he could. The goblin did not look away. He inclined his head, just slightly, and then returned to his ledger. Harry filed that away. The cart ride was extraordinary and nauseating in equal measure. Hagrid moaned. Harry gripped the sides and felt the cold air rush past and thought about the goblin with the ledger. Vault 687 turned out to hold more gold than Harry had ever seen in his life, great golden piles of it, green glinting galleons and bronze nuts and silver sickles, more money than the Dursleys had ever wanted Harry to know existed in any context connected to him. He took what he needed. He tried not to think about the word mine too hard, because it felt fragile in a way he didn't trust yet. On the way back up, they stopped for a package from Vault 713, something small and heavy wrapped in brown paper that Hagrid refused to discuss, and then the cart was climbing, the darkness falling away, and Harry was thinking about the cold air and the gold and the watching goblin. The goblin was waiting for them at the top. Not at his counter. At the end of the main hall, standing slightly apart from the flow of traffic, his hands folded in front of him. When Harry stepped off the cart, the goblin said, without preamble and without raising his voice, "Mr. Potter. I am Ragnarok. I am the senior accounts manager for the Potter estate. I would appreciate a few minutes of your time." Hagrid blinked. "Now, hold on, Dumbledore didn't say anything about, Dumbledore," Ragnarok said pleasantly, "does not manage the Potter estate. I do. Mr. Potter, if you'll follow me." Harry looked at Hagrid. Hagrid looked deeply uncertain, the kind of uncertain that comes from not having instructions for this particular situation. Harry looked back at Ragnarok. "Okay," Harry said. "Harry, I'll be a few minutes," Harry said. Not a question. Not an apology. He followed Ragnarok. The office was nothing like the main hall. It was small and practical, a desk of dark wood, a single lamp, 2 chairs, and shelves of ledgers so precise and numerous that they seemed less like books and more like a wall. Ragnarok sat behind the desk and gestured to the chair across from it, and Harry sat down, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "How much do you know," Ragnarok said, "about your parents' estate?" "Nothing," Harry said. "That is what I expected." "That is also," Ragnarok said, with the tone of someone who has been waiting to say something for a long time, entirely by design. He opened a drawer and placed a document on the desk between them. It was old, not ancient, but old enough that the edges had that particular softness of paper that has been handled without being damaged, preserved with care. The seal at the bottom was intact. Deep red wax, stamped with a stag and a doe facing each other. "This is a copy. The original is held in the secondary vault. Are you familiar with the term blood-sealed will?" "No," Harry said. "Your parents were," Ragnarok said. "Most people do not bother. Most people trust that their wishes will be honored after their deaths, and most of the time they are correct to trust this. Your parents were not most people. They were aware, in the final months of their lives, that they were targets. They were aware that should they die, certain parties would make decisions about your future that your parents did not endorse. So they were thorough. He paused. Your father was an Auror's son and a dueling champion. Your mother was the most talented charms practitioner to graduate Hogwarts in 40 years. When they decided to do something, they did it correctly. Harry looked at the document. His father's handwriting was at the top. He knew it was his father's because it looked like what he imagined his own handwriting might look like if he had ever been allowed to develop it properly rather than being handed broken pencils and told not to take up too much space. Can I read it? It's yours, Ragnarok said simply. Harry read slowly. He had learned to read by hoarding books from the school library and reading them after lights out with a torch he had found in the bin, so he was a good reader, just a quiet one. He read every word. It took 20 minutes. Ragnarok waited with the patience of mountains. The will was very clear. Beautifully, almost aggressively clear, like his parents had anticipated every attempt to misread it and had closed each gap before it could be exploited. Harry was to be placed, in the event of both parents' deaths, with Sirius Orion Black, named as godfather. In the event Sirius was unable or unavailable, the secondary guardian was Frank and Alice Longbottom. In the event of their incapacitation, the tertiary guardian was Andromeda Tonks. At no point, the will used italics, which was not a thing wills usually did, and which told Harry everything he needed to know about how his mother felt about this. At no point was Harry to be placed with Petunia Dursley, née Evans, or her husband, Vernon Dursley. The will named them specifically. The will cited specific reasons. Lily Potter, who had grown up with Petunia Evans, who had watched her sister curdle with resentment for 20 years, had written those reasons with the precision of someone who had been afraid of exactly this outcome and had tried to prevent it. The prevention had not worked. At the bottom of the document, there was an addendum that had not been there originally. Harry could tell because the ink was slightly different, and because it was dated 3 days before October 31, 1981. His mother's handwriting this time. Smaller and faster than his father's, like she was writing against a clock. If you are reading this and you are not our son, if this will has been violated, if he has been placed contrary to our wishes, know that this document is not merely legal. It is witnessed. The witness stone described in Addendum B has been present in Harry's life from his first breath. It does not require activation. It records. It has always been recording. Harry looked up. What's a witness stone? Ragnarok reached into the drawer again and placed a small object on the desk. It was roughly the size and shape of a large marble, dark gray, perfectly smooth, and it gave off no light or heat or any indication of being magical at all. Except that when Harry leaned forward to look at it, he had the sudden absolute conviction that it was looking back. Your mother created it herself, Ragnarok said. The enchantment was extraordinary. It is keyed to your magical signature, which she established before your birth. It has been present in your environment for the entirety of your life, storing everything it observes. It is a passive artifact. It does not interfere. It does not protect. It only remembers. He paused. It was placed by your mother in the lining of the blanket you were wrapped in when you were left on the Dursleys' doorstep. It returned to us here 2 weeks ago, because the enchantment specified that it would return to the vault when you first entered Gringotts. Harry was very quiet for a moment. It recorded everything, he said. Not a question. Everything, Ragnarok confirmed. 10 years and 8 months of observation. Every room you occupied. Every interaction. He said the word with a flat precision that communicated exactly how much he understood about what that word contained. Every conversation in your presence. Continuously. Harry sat back in his chair. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about the word freak, which he had heard so many times in his life that there had been a period, around age 7, where he had genuinely thought it was a synonym for his name. He thought about Dudley's gang, about the school shoes that were never quite his size, about the way Aunt Petunia's voice went when she spoke to Harry versus the way it went when she spoke to anyone else, the difference so ordinary by now that he had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the sound of a leaking tap. He thought about his parents, who had been dead for almost 11 years, sitting in that room 3 days before they died, writing at no point in italics, trying to stop something they could see coming. They had tried. They had tried very hard, and they had tried in the right ways, and it hadn't worked, and Harry was going to have to decide what to do about that. "Why are you telling me this now?" he said. "I'm 11. "You are the head of the Potter estate," Ragnarok said. "You have been legally so since your parents' deaths." In practice, Dumbledore's office filed a series of administrative motions through the ministry that effectively froze your estate in a supervised status, ostensibly for your protection as a minor. This is within the technical limits of wizarding law, though your parents will anticipated and preemptively objected to exactly this kind of motion. The blood seal means the will cannot be destroyed or suppressed. But it can be, and was, strategically ignored. He folded his hands on the desk. "You are telling me that you are 11. I am telling you that you were always entitled to this information. The question of what you do with it is yours to answer. We can do nothing without your authorization. We will do nothing without your authorization." "But Mr. Potter." He met Harry's eyes again with that same direct, undeflecting gaze. "We have been waiting for you to come and ask." Harry looked at the witness stone on the desk between them. "What does it look like," he said slowly, "when it plays back?" "It projects," Ragnarok said. "Like a pensieve, but not memory. Observation. Unedited. Continuous. Has anyone seen it?" "No. Only you have the right to authorize a viewing." "And if I authorized it, who could see it?" Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. "Anyone you wished. A legal body. A court. A press organization. A gathering of private citizens." He paused. "The mechanisms of wizarding law are not entirely without function, Mr. Potter. They require the right evidence and the right moment. Gringotts has legal standing in the Wisengamot that predates the ministry itself. If this will were filed as a matter of public record, if the stone's evidence were entered into the legal record, the ministry would be obligated to respond. And Dumbledore would be required to explain himself before a legal body he does not control." Harry looked at the will on the desk. His mother's handwriting on the addendum. "He has been placed contrary to our wishes." He thought about what it would mean to be afraid of Albus Dumbledore. He understood, in a distant, academic way, that he was supposed to be, that the man was famous and powerful and had arranged Harry's entire life without asking, and that powerful people who arranged things without asking did not generally respond well to being confronted. He found, checking carefully, that he was not afraid. He was something else entirely. Something cleaner and colder than fear and considerably more useful. He was decided. "I'd like to see the secondary vault," Harry said. The secondary vault was not a money vault. It had no gold in it, no glittering piles of anything valuable in the commercial sense. What it had was documents, carefully organized, magically preserved, stacked in precise order in fireproof cases along 3 walls, and one raised stone platform in the center, about knee-height, on which sat a locked box made of the same dark material as the witness stone itself. Ragnarok touched the box and it opened. Inside was the original will, the twin of the copy upstairs, along with a collection of other documents, property deeds, letters, a journal in his father's handwriting that Harry looked at and did not touch yet, a folded photograph. And at the very bottom, nestled in a curve of black velvet, another witness stone, not gray but dark amber, and larger than the one upstairs, and absolutely humming with something that Harry felt in his back teeth. "That one," Ragnarok said from the doorway, "contains the full record." Harry crouched in front of it. He didn't touch it. He looked at it for a long time. In the photograph at the bottom of the box, his parents were laughing. His father had his arm around his mother's shoulders and his mother was saying something that made them both crease up, and it was the kind of laughter that happens between people who have been laughing together for years and intend to keep doing it, the kind of laughter that belongs to people building a life together. They were not performing happiness for the camera. They were just happy, right then, in that moment, and the photograph had caught it. Harry's hand was very steady when he picked it up. He put it in his pocket. "Right," he said, standing. "I want to speak to a solicitor. A wizarding one. Someone Dumbledore doesn't know." Ragnar's expression did not change. If anything, it became fractionally more satisfied in a way that, on a goblin's face, was barely visible and absolutely unmistakable. "I anticipated this. I have taken the liberty of drafting a list of candidates. There is one in particular, Arcturus Finch, of Finch and Morley, who specializes in estate law and who has argued before the Wisengamot on 17 separate occasions with a success rate that is frankly embarrassing to his opponents. Has he ever worked for Dumbledore? He has declined to work for Dumbledore twice." "Good," Harry said. "I want to meet him. He is available Thursday." Harry looked at him. "You already contacted him." "I contacted him 2 weeks ago," Ragnar said, without apology. "When the stone returned. I told him a consultation might be forthcoming. He said, and I am quoting directly, about time." Harry almost laughed. It surprised him, the almost laugh, the loosening in his chest that came with it. He couldn't remember the last time something had surprised a laugh out of him. "Thursday," he said. "Okay." He took one more look at the vault, at the documents, at the stone platform, at the amber stone in its velvet case, and then he walked back toward the corridor, and Ragnar pulled the door closed behind them. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said as they walked back toward the cart. "There is one more thing you should know." "Okay." "The administrative freeze on your estate, the one filed through the ministry, was not filed by Dumbledore personally. It was filed by his proxy, one Mundungus Fletcher, who was acting on behalf of a trust described only as a concerned party in the filings. The paperwork was deliberately obscured. However, the original motion required a Wisengamot cosignature." He paused on the path, just slightly. "That cosignature belongs to Cornelius Fudge." Harry thought about that. "The Minister for Magic." "The current Minister for Magic, yes. So it's not just Dumbledore." "It has never been just anyone," Ragnar said. "Power tends to distribute itself in networks. The question is always which thread, when pulled, unravels the most." They rode the cart back up in silence. Harry watched the darkness rush past and thought about threads and networks and a photograph in his pocket and a stone recording 10 years of a life that should have been different. He wasn't angry. That surprised him too. He had expected anger, had braced for it the way you brace for a wave, but what he felt instead was something more like the sensation of stepping out of a room where the ceiling had always been too low, a sudden awareness of height, of space, of the ability to stand up straight. He had spent 10 years being small. Not because he was. Because someone had decided it was convenient. He was done being convenient. Hagrid was waiting for him in the main hall, looking simultaneously relieved and apprehensive in the way that large, good-natured people look when they know something they're not supposed to tell you and are bad at keeping secrets. "Everything all right?" Hagrid asked. "Yes," Harry said. Then, because Hagrid had been genuinely kind to him, and because Harry could tell the difference between someone who was complicit and someone who was simply fond, Hagrid. "Did you know my parents wrote a will?" Hagrid's face went through 3 emotions in quick succession. Well, most people do, don't they, a specific one," Harry said. "About who should take me in." The silence that followed was answer enough. Hagrid looked at the floor. His hands, which were the size of bin lids, found each other in front of him and held on. "It wasn't my decision," Hagrid said quietly. "Dumbledore said, he said it was the safest, that your mother's blood, the protections." "I know what he said," Harry said. Not unkindly. Just steadily. "I'm not angry at you. Harry, I want to see the rest of the alley, Harry said. I need school supplies. Hagrid looked at him for a long moment, this small, thin, 11-year-old boy with glasses that didn't fit and clothes 3 sizes too large and the absolute stillness of someone who has made a decision, and Hagrid, who was not a complicated man but was a good one, nodded slowly. They walked back out into the alley, and the sun was higher now, and the crowd had thickened, and people glanced at Harry's forehead and murmured things, and Harry let them look. He had a name. He had parents who had loved him enough to fight for him even from beyond the point where fighting was possible. He had a document, sealed in blood, that said in his mother's handwriting, "He was placed contrary to our wishes." He had a Thursday meeting with a solicitor who had declined Dumbledore twice and thought this moment was overdue. And he had, tucked in his pocket, a photograph of 2 people laughing together like they planned to keep doing it forever, which they had not gotten to do, but which had at least happened, which was more than nothing. Harry Potter walked down Diagon Alley in the July sunshine with his hands in his pockets and his chin up. He bought his books. He bought his wand, the wand chose him, as it turned out, and the wand maker went a very interesting color when it did, and said something about brothers, and Harry filed that away too. He ate a very large ice cream cone because Hagrid insisted and because it was, he realized, his birthday and he had never had a birthday ice cream before. He talked to Hagrid about Hogwarts, the classes, the houses, the Quidditch that Hagrid mentioned with the enthusiasm of a person describing a religion. He was pleasant. He was present. He asked the right questions in the right places. He was, in every external sense, a perfectly normal excited 11-year-old about to discover the magical world. On the inside, he was building plans. Sorting what he knew from what he needed to know. Arranging pieces on a board he was just beginning to understand. Thinking about a man named Arcturus Finch who had set about time, and a goblin who had been waiting for him with the patience of someone who believed a thing was inevitable, and a will written in his mother's italics, and 10 years of recording stored in an amber stone in a vault that Albus Dumbledore had never known existed. The sun went down over Diagon Alley in shades of copper and rose, and Harry Potter stood outside the leaky cauldron waiting for Hagrid to retrieve his motorbike, and looked up at the sky over London with the particular expression of someone who has been inside a small room for a very long time and has just figured out where the door is. He was going to open it. He was going to walk through. And he was not going to be afraid of who was waiting on the other side. Chapter 2, The Public Record. Arcturus Finch was not what Harry expected. He had built a picture in his head on the walk to Thursday, a picture assembled from the word 17 Wisengamot victories and declined Dumbledore twice, which together suggested someone tall and severe, probably grey at the temples, probably the kind of man who communicated primarily through meaningful pauses and the strategic deployment of reading glasses. Someone impressive in the way that marble staircases are impressive, beautiful, cold, and designed to make you feel small. Arcturus Finch was 5'4", wore robes the color of old mustard, and was eating a sandwich when Harry and Ragnarok arrived at his office above a Diagon Alley bookshop at 9 in the morning. Sit down," he said, waving the sandwich at the chairs across his desk without looking up from the file he was reading. "Ragnarok, there's tea on the cabinet." "Mr. Potter, do you want anything?" "I've got another sandwich." "Mrs. Finch makes them too large, which I consider a character virtue in a spouse." Harry sat down. "I'm fine, thank you." Finch looked up. He had bright dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of face that had probably always looked like it was about to ask you a question you hadn't considered yet. He looked at Harry for a moment, not at his forehead, which Harry noted with immediate appreciation, and then he set down his sandwich and picked up a different file from the stack beside him. "Right," he said. "The Potter will. Blood sealed, Gringotts held, Dumbledore ignored. I've been through the documents Ragnarok sent me. Before I say anything else, I want to ask you something." "Okay," Harry said. "What do you want out of this?" Harry had thought about this. He had thought about it on the train back to Surrey on Tuesday and in the cupboard that night with his torch and the copy of the will Ragnarok had given him, which he had read 4 more times by the time morning came. He had thought about what the angry answer was, and what the righteous answer was, and what the strategic answer was, and how they were and weren't the same thing. I want the will executed as written, Harry said. My parents chose a guardian for me. I want that honored, even if it's late. I want the Dursleys held accountable for what the witness stone recorded. And I want it on the public record. All of it. Not sealed, not managed, not handled quietly. He paused. Dumbledore is going to want to handle it quietly. I want it on the record before he gets the chance. Finch looked at him over his glasses for a long moment. How old are you? 11. Right, Finch said, and picked his sandwich back up. Here's the situation. The blood seal on your parents' will means it cannot be legally set aside by any ministry filing, regardless of how many co-signatures Fudge put on Fletcher's motion. The motion is, technically speaking, a nullity. It was always a nullity. Nobody challenged it because nobody knew about the secondary vault, and the goblins, he glanced at Ragnarok, were not in a position to act unilaterally. Gringotts acts in the interests of its clients, Ragnarok said, with a mildness that somehow communicated the opposite of mild. Our client was unavailable to instruct us. Quite. Now he's available. Finch spread 3 documents across the desk. First, we file the will as public record with the Gringotts clerk's office. This is standard, non-optional once a blood seal is invoked, and it cannot be blocked by the ministry. The moment it's filed, it becomes a matter of public legal record, which means any accredited press organization can access it. Second, we submit a formal complaint under the Guardian Designation Act of 1692, yes, it's that old, which is actually useful because it predates the ministry's authority to override it, naming the violation of the designated guardianship. This requires a response from the ministry within 30 days. Third, and this is where it gets interesting. He tapped the third document. We apply for access to the witness stone evidence under the Evidence Preservation Act. The stone is magical testimony. It has to be reviewed by a certified Gringotts arbiter before it can be entered into the record, but once it is entered, it is as legally binding as a sworn statement. How long does all of this take? Harry asked. Filing the will is immediate, I can have it at the clerk's office by this afternoon. The complaint takes 3 days to process. The stone evidence review requires scheduling an arbiter, which is, Finch made a face, usually 2 to 3 weeks. Unless. He held up a finger. Unless the evidence is deemed to constitute proof of an ongoing harm to a minor. In which case the arbiter is required by law to convene within 72 hours. Harry thought about the word ongoing. He was going back to Privet Drive after today. He would be there until September 1st. It's ongoing, he said. I know, Finch said. There was nothing pitying in it. Just acknowledgement, which was what Harry wanted. Which means we move fast and we move in the right order. The will goes on record today. That starts the clock. By the time the press picks it up, and they will pick it up, I'd give it 12 hours, the complaint will already be in process, and the stone review will be scheduled. Dumbledore will hear about the will filing before tonight. But the machinery will already be in motion. Can he stop it? He can try, Finch said. He has significant political weight. But blood-sealed estate law is not an area where political weight does much. It's like trying to stop a river with a very impressive hat. He paused. What he can do is try to control the narrative. Go to the press himself, try to frame this as a misunderstanding, a well-intentioned decision made under extraordinary circumstances. He's good at that kind of framing. He's had decades of practice. So we give him as little time as possible to frame anything, Harry said. Finch smiled for the first time. It was a sharp, satisfied smile, the kind that belongs to someone who has spent a long career watching people miss the point and is genuinely pleased when someone doesn't. Exactly. I've drafted a summary of the will's key provisions, the guardian designation, the explicit exclusion of the Dursleys, the existence and purpose of the witness stone. One page. Clear language, no legal jargon. If this lands on a reporter's desk alongside the official filing, the story writes itself. Which reporter? Ragnock said. I was thinking, Finch said, Rita Skeeter. Harry didn't know who that was. Ragnock's expression suggested he had thoughts about it. Skeeter is sensationalist, the goblin said. Skeeter is effective, Finch said. And she hates Dumbledore. Professionally, I mean. He declined to give her an interview 7 years ago and she has never forgiven him, which in terms of motivation I find entirely adequate. She'll run with this before the sun goes down. Harry thought about it. Who else? The Wizarding Wireless, specifically the news division, not the entertainment side. Their presenter, Benedict Cross, is old school. He verifies before he publishes, which means it'll take him a bit longer, but when he runs it, it sticks. If Skeeter is the match, Cross is the bonfire. Finch looked at Harry. Both? Both, Harry said. He signed 4 documents that morning. Finch walked him through each one, not slowly, not the patronizing speed of someone explaining something to a child, but clearly and directly, treating the signatures as what they were, consequential. Harry read everything before he signed it. Finch waited without sighing, which Harry appreciated. Ragnock witnessed. The office smelled like old paper and tea and the faint ghost of mustard from Finch's sandwich, and outside the window Diagon Alley was waking up in the mid-morning sun, and Harry sat in a chair that was slightly too tall for him and signed his name 4 times in a hand that had been broken and cramped and denied pens for 11 years and was, he had decided, going to be recognizable and clear from now on. When the last signature was done, Finch stacked the documents and stood. I'll have the will filed by 2 o'clock. The clerk's office closes at 4, so word will be out by early evening. Keep yourself available, not to Dumbledore, not to anyone ministry connected. If an owl arrives from the headmaster's office, you are not obligated to respond. He's not my headmaster yet, Harry said. Finch paused and looked at him. Then he laughed, a short, genuine sound. No, he's not. Fair point. He extended his hand across the desk, and Harry shook it. Mr. Potter. It is genuinely my pleasure. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it. Outside, on the stairs down to the alley, Ragnock fell into step beside him. The alley was busier now, the morning crowd thick, and Harry kept his collar up out of habit more than strategy. One more thing, Ragnock said quietly. The Fudge co-signature, once the will is filed, it becomes a matter of public record that the ministry blocked a blood-sealed will. Someone will ask how. When they trace the mechanism, they will find Fletcher's motion. When they examine Fletcher's motion, they will find Fudge's signature. And Fudge will say he didn't know what he was signing, Harry said. He will say exactly that. Will it be true? Ragnock considered the question with appropriate seriousness. It will be partially true. Fudge is not an intelligent man. He may not have understood the specific implications of what he co-signed. But he signed it because Dumbledore asked him to, and he understood enough to know that it kept certain arrangements in place and certain questions from being asked. He paused. Ignorance of a thing and choosing not to understand a thing are different problems. But they look the same, Harry said. To him, they feel the same, Ragnock said. That is, ultimately, his difficulty to manage. They parted on the alley steps, and Harry walked back into the crowd alone, which he didn't mind. He had grown up alone. The difference now was that alone felt like a choice rather than a sentence. The owl came to Privet Drive at 7:23 in the evening. Harry knew the exact time because he was watching the clock on the kitchen wall, which he could see from the stairs, which was where he was sitting. He had come home from London and eaten a plate of food Aunt Petunia put in front of him without comment and then gone upstairs and then, when the house quieted, come back down to sit on the stairs in the dark the way he used to when he wanted to hear the television from the living room without being visible. He was not lonely. He was waiting. The owl was a Hogwarts post owl, school colors, institutional bearing, and it arrived at the living room window rather than Harry's bedroom, because it had been sent to the house generally rather than to Harry specifically, which told him something about how the sender had thought about it. Aunt Petunia opened the window with the expression she reserved exclusively for magical correspondence, the expression that said she wished very much that the magical world would collectively cease to exist, and the owl dropped a letter on the kitchen table and departed with great self-importance. The letter was addressed to the household. Harry came downstairs. Uncle Vernon was already read. "This is about that business at the bank," he said. "Whatever you did, I didn't do anything," Harry said, picking up the letter. "Yet." That silenced the room in an interesting way. Dudley looked up from his biscuits. Aunt Petunia's hand went to her mouth. Uncle Vernon went 3 shades deeper. Harry opened the letter. It was from Dumbledore. The handwriting was looping and precise, the kind of handwriting that had decades of authority built into it, and it read, "Dear Harry, I hope this letter finds you well. It has come to my attention that certain documents connected to your family estate have been filed today with the Gringotts clerk office. I understand that this must feel like an important step, and I want you to know that I appreciate your curiosity about your parents and your past. However, I would ask, as someone who has had only your best interests at heart, that you allow me to explain the decisions that were made on your behalf before any further action is taken. Some choices, made in the darkest of times, are difficult to understand without the full context. I would very much like to provide that context. My office is always open to you. Yours, Albus Dumbledore." Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. "Well?" Uncle Vernon said. "Nothing important," Harry said, and went back upstairs to bed. The next morning, the owls started arriving before Harry was awake. He heard them, the tapping on the window, first 1, then 3, then what sounded like an entire postal service, and sat up in his too small bed in the too small room and looked at the window and felt something shift in his chest. Something that was not quite excitement and not quite nerves but lived in the same neighborhood as both. He opened the window. 6 owls tumbled in, each carrying something. 2 newspapers. 3 letters. 1 very small owl that seemed to have attached itself to the group out of social enthusiasm rather than actual purpose, as it was carrying nothing but seemed very pleased to be there. He opened the newspapers first. The Daily Prophet had it on the front page. The headline was Rita Skeeter's, and it was, as promised, effective. Potter will surfaces. Dumbledore named in guardianship scandal blood-sealed document reveals boy who lived placed against parents' explicit wishes. Witness stone evidence pending review. The article beneath it was exactly what Finch had promised, sensationalist in tone but accurate in fact, which was a more useful combination than it sounded. Skeeter had clearly received both the will summary and the official filing, and she had written it with the energy of someone settling a 7-year score. It named Dumbledore. It named the Dursleys. It quoted from the will directly, Lily Potter's at no point in italics, which hit differently in a newspaper than it had on paper in a private office. It mentioned the witness stone and the pending arbiter review and described, in general terms, what 10 years of magical observation might contain. The second newspaper was the Wizarding Wireless Transcript, which Cross's team published alongside the morning broadcast. His version was shorter, drier, and considerably more damaging for it. Where Skeeter gave you feeling, Cross gave you architecture, the specific legal mechanisms, the fudge co-signature, the Guardian Designation Act violation, the precise way in which the blood seal made every ministry action against the will retroactively null. Reading Cross after Skeeter was like watching someone build a wall after watching someone set a fire. The fire got the attention. The wall held it in place. Harry sat on his bed and read both articles in full and then sat quietly for a moment. He had known this was coming. He had planned for it, signed the papers, authorized it. But there was still something strange about seeing your own name in a headline and knowing that right now, at this exact moment, people all over the country were reading it over their breakfasts and having opinions about it. People who knew the name Harry Potter as a story were discovering that Harry Potter was also a person who had filed legal documents and had parents who had fought for him and had spent 10 years in a house he was never supposed to be in. He opened the letters. 2 were from strangers, 1 outraged, 1 sympathetic, both eloquent. 1 was from Finch, a brief note, front page. As expected. The arbiter has been contacted, witness stone review scheduled for the 22nd. 3 days. Fudge's office has already sent me 2 owls and it is only 8 in the morning. Harry smiled at that one. Downstairs was a different world. Aunt Petunia had the wireless on, which she never did on weekdays, and she was standing at the kitchen counter holding a cup of tea that had gone cold, her face the color of old chalk. Uncle Vernon was on the phone, his Muggle mobile, which he gripped with both hands as though strangling it might help, speaking to what sounded like his solicitor in the flat, constipated tones of a man describing a problem that he does not have adequate language for. Dudley was watching Harry from the breakfast table with an expression Harry had never seen on him before. Not malice. Something more like the dawning awareness that a situation has parameters he does not understand. Harry poured himself a bowl of cereal and sat down. The school, Aunt Petunia said, not quite to Harry and not quite to the wall. They'll say they'll make it sound like, the will is on the public record, Harry said. The witness stone review is in 3 days. She turned. What is that? What does it mean? What does it? It means everything it recorded is going to be entered into the wizarding legal record, Harry said. He kept his voice level. He was not performing calm, he was genuinely calm, which was more unsettling, he could tell, than anger would have been. I don't know if that crosses over into Muggle law. I think that's a question for your solicitor. Uncle Vernon made a sound like a kettle reaching boiling point. You ungrateful little, Vernon, Aunt Petunia said, sharply. Something in her voice stopped him. Harry looked at her, really looked at her, the way you rarely look at someone you've lived with for a decade, and saw something he had never seen before in Petunia Dursley's face. It was not guilt, exactly. It was the expression of someone watching a decision they made a very long time ago arrive at their door in its full-grown form. She had known, Harry realized. Not everything. But she had known enough. She had known about the will, or suspected it, or been told enough by Dumbledore to understand that she was there over someone's objection, and she had chosen comfort and resentment over honesty, the way she had been choosing it since she was a girl. He didn't say any of that. There was nothing useful in saying it. He finished his cereal and went back upstairs. The 22nd arrived. The arbiter review was held in a small room at the Wisengamot building, not one of the main courtrooms, just a conference room with long windows and a table of dark wood and 5 people, Harry, Finch, Ragnarok, the arbiter herself, a compact woman named Griselda Marchbanks who moved with the precision of someone who has seen everything and is no longer capable of being surprised by any of it, and a ministry observer who had been sent, it was clear, primarily to report back, and who spent most of the session trying to look neutral and failing. The stone sat on the table in its velvet case. Marchbanks examined it for 20 minutes without touching it, asking Harry precise questions about its origin, his mother's enchantment specifications, the circumstances of its return to the vault. Harry answered everything directly and without embellishment. Finch sat beside him and said almost nothing, which was, Harry had come to understand, what a good solicitor does when their client is performing adequately. Then Marchbanks authorized the playback. It was not like watching a film. It was more like standing inside a space, the way a pensive works, present but peripheral, unable to interact. And it was not, Harry was grateful to discover, comprehensive in the sense of unbroken continuity. The stone organized its evidence into categories based on the enchantment's parameters, and what it showed was not every moment of 10 years but the relevant ones, the defined ones, the ones that constituted what his mother had been afraid of. Harry did not watch most of it. He had lived it. He knew what it contained. He sat in his chair with his hands flat on the table and looked at the window and watched the light outside and let the room behind him do what it needed to do. Marchbanks was a professional. The Ministry observer was not, entirely, and Harry could hear the quality of his silence change as the playback progressed, a different kind of stillness, the stillness of someone trying to process something that is rearranging assumptions they didn't know they had. When it finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "I'm entering this into the record," Marchbanks said. Her voice was exactly the same as it had been before. Steady and factual and not leaving room for discussion. "Full evidence, unredacted, as submitted. Mr. Potter, you'll have the certification within 24 hours. "Thank you," Harry said. The Ministry observer opened his mouth. "The certification is non-negotiable under the Evidence Preservation Act," Marchbanks said, without looking at him. "If you have concerns, you may direct them to the clerk's office. In writing." The observer closed his mouth. The Wizarding Wireless ran Benedict Cross's follow-up piece that evening. Harry heard it on a radio Finch had lent him, a small, battered device that tuned to the Wizarding frequency and sat on the desk in his room at Privet Drive surrounded by Hogwarts textbooks he had started reading 2 weeks early, partly out of genuine interest and partly because reading was the thing he did when the noise in his head needed somewhere to go. Cross's voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of someone who understood that the truth didn't need to be performed to land. He read from the certified evidence summary. He read from the will. He read the clause about Petunia Dursley by name, and Lily Potter's italics, and then he read the Fudge co-signature detail and paused just long enough before the next sentence that every person listening understood what the pause meant. "The Minister for Magic's office issued a statement this afternoon," Cross said. The statement reads, and I quote, "Minister Fudge signed the administrative motion in good faith, understanding it to be a routine guardianship maintenance filing. He was not aware of the blood-sealed will or its provisions, and extends his deepest sympathy to Harry Potter." The statement does not address why a routine filing required a ministerial co-signature, why the motion was filed by a known ministry associate of Albus Dumbledore, or why no review of the Potter guardianship was conducted at any point in the past 10 years. Another pause. The minister's office was asked these questions. It did not respond. Harry listened to the whole broadcast. Then he turned the radio off and sat in the quiet. He thought about Sirius Black, who was supposed to have been his guardian and was currently in Azkaban for a crime Harry didn't have the full details of yet but intended to get. He thought about the Longbottoms, who Hagrid had mentioned in passing once and who Harry had since learned had been tortured into insanity. He thought about Andromeda Tonks, the third name on the list, who had apparently not been contacted by anyone at any point. He thought about how systematically everyone who could have taken him in had been removed from the equation, and how you could call each individual decision justifiable and the pattern was still the pattern. He was not going to be able to get Sirius out of Azkaban this summer. He understood that. The machinery he had set in motion was real and moving, but it had its own pace, and the Azkaban question was complex in ways that required more information than he currently had. He had added it to the list in his head that had been growing since that Thursday morning in Finch's mustard-colored office, and he would get to it. There was a knock at his bedroom door. He said nothing. The knock came again, and then, after a moment, Aunt Petunia's voice, strained and careful, said, There's someone at the door for you." Harry went downstairs. The man standing on the front step of number 4 was not what he expected from the magical world's general aesthetic. He was young, late 20s, maybe 30, with dark brown skin and neat robes and a leather briefcase and the specific composed expression of someone delivering official information rather than personal opinion. He held out a card. "Mr. Potter. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a legal representative for the Wisingamots Guardian Oversight Committee. We've been formally convened following the certification of the witness stone evidence." He paused. "We need to discuss your current living arrangements and your welfare for the remainder of the summer." Behind Harry, Uncle Vernon had appeared at the kitchen door. Harry could feel him there without looking, the size of him, the heat of his discomfort. Harry looked at Marcus Webb and said, "Come in." "I'd rather not," Webb said, with a glance past Harry at Vernon that communicated everything briefly. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" They sat on the front step, which was unconventional and seemed to mildly bother Webb's professional sensibility but which Harry preferred because it was outside. Webb opened his briefcase and took out a file. The committee has reviewed the certified evidence. We're satisfied that the conditions at this address constitute the grounds described in the Guardian Designation Act. He spoke quietly, precisely, his eyes on the document. As such, we're initiating a formal removal proceeding. This doesn't happen overnight, there are notification requirements, a Wisengamot sign-off, but it means that by the end of the summer, this guardianship arrangement will be formally dissolved. And where do I go? Harry asked. Andromeda Tonks, Harry said. The will names her third. Webb looked up. You've read the full will. Multiple times. Webb nodded slowly. The committee is aware of that designation. Mrs. Tonks has been contacted. Harry felt something move through him at that, something he would have been embarrassed to name, something that was too large for the front step of number 4 Privet Drive and entirely appropriate to the rest of the situation. Someone had been contacted. Someone on his parents' list was reachable, alive, and now aware that they were on the list. She's willing? Harry asked. She's more than willing, Webb said, and something in his voice softened just fractionally. She said, and again I'm quoting, I should have been called a decade ago. I'll take the boy the moment it's legal. Harry looked at the front garden of number 4. At the perfect grass and the perfect flower beds and the clean front path and the complete, absolute absence of any version of himself in any of it. Nothing here had ever been his. Not the room, not the space, not the air he breathed in it. He had known that. He had always known that in the low continuous way you know things you never examine because examining them won't change them. It would change now. How long, he said, until it's legal? 2 weeks. 3 at most, depending on the Wisengamot sign-off. Webb closed the file. You'll be at Hogwarts before September, Mr. Potter. You won't have to come back here after term ends. Harry nodded. His throat was doing something he declined to indulge. Thank you, he said. He went back inside. Uncle Vernon was still in the kitchen doorway, and he looked at Harry with an expression that had all the old components, the red face, the puffed chest, the gathered authority, but something had gone out of it. Some central certainty that had always been there, the certainty that he was the one who decided what happened in this house, that his size and his voice and his capacity for displeasure were the gravitational center of everything. Harry walked past him and went upstairs and lay on his bed and looked at the ceiling. In his pocket, the photograph of his parents laughing. On his desk, the certification notice from Marchbank's office, already arrived by Owl while he was on the front step, because Gringotts and Finch's office had arranged for expedited delivery and the machinery, once in motion, had its own momentum. In the world outside, the wizarding wireless playing its evening repeat, Cross's measured voice asking questions that the ministry hadn't answered, in a tone that made clear the questions were not going away. Harry was 11 years old. He had been, until 3 weeks ago, a boy who had learned not to want things. He had not known his parents' handwriting. He had not known the word blood seal. He had not known that somewhere in London there was a goblin who had been waiting for him with the patience of someone who believed a thing was inevitable. He knew now. He closed his eyes and let the sounds of the house settle around him, the television downstairs, the Dursleys' muted and careful movements, the particular silence of a house that knows something has changed and hasn't figured out yet what to do about it. 3 weeks. Then Hogwarts. And somewhere in the wizarding world, Albus Dumbledore was sitting in his office at the top of a tower with a sorting hat and a collection of magical instruments and a lemon drop, trying to figure out how to explain himself to a world that was suddenly, for the first time in a very long time, asking him to. Harry thought that sounded like an interesting problem. He thought he'd like to watch. Chapter 3, The weight of a name. Hogwarts arrived the way all enormous things do, gradually and then all at once. Harry had the window seat on the Hogwarts Express, and he watched the landscape change from city to suburb to countryside with the particular attention of someone cataloging exits, not because he was afraid but because he had spent a long time in situations where knowing the exits mattered and the habit had simply become part of how he moved through the world. Ron Weasley, who had tumbled into his compartment at King's Cross with a smudge of something on his nose and the unself-conscious energy of a person who had never had reason to be guarded, talked for approximately 40 minutes straight about Hogwarts without seeming to require much response, which Harry found comfortable rather than annoying. Ron was not performing. He was just enthusiastic, which was a thing Harry had not had much proximity to and found unexpectedly easy to be around. Hermione Granger arrived looking for a toad and stayed for the conversation. She sat across from Harry with her hands folded over her knees and her eyes moving between them with the alert, assessing quality of someone running calculations, and when Ron mentioned Harry's name, just said it, casually, the way you'd mention anyone's name, something shifted in her expression. Not awe. More like recognition, the kind you get when a piece of information slots into a framework you've already built. "You're the one from the papers," she said. "I'm the one from the papers," Harry confirmed. "The will," she said. "The will." She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone deciding whether to say the next thing. Then she said, "What Dumbledore did, placing you with Muggles against a blood-sealed will, is there a precedent for it? I've been reading Hogwarts, a history and the foundations of wizarding law and I couldn't find a direct parallel." Ron looked at her. "You read the foundations of wizarding law for fun?" "I read everything," Hermione said, not defensively, just as a statement of fact. Then, back to Harry, "Is there a precedent?" "Finch said there isn't," Harry said. "The blood seal is specific enough that there's never been a direct violation on record. Which means there's no existing case law for what happens next, which means the Wisengamot is going to have to build it as they go." He paused. "Finch thinks that's actually useful. Uncharted territory means Dumbledore can't point to past decisions and say everything was handled correctly by established procedure. Every decision gets examined fresh." Hermione looked at him the way she would spend a lot of their friendship looking at him, with the expression of someone who expected to be the most prepared person in any given conversation and was encountering, periodically, the experience of not being that. It was not a bad expression. Just recalibrating. "You've thought about this a lot," she said. "I had 3 weeks at the Dursleys with nothing to do but read," Harry said. "I got through most of the textbooks and all of the legal documents Finch sent me." "All of them?" "Twice." Ron looked between them with the expression of a person who had joined a conversation midway through and was unsure of the rules. "So," he said, "is Dumbledore actually going to get in trouble? Like, properly?" "He's already in trouble," Harry said. "The question is how much he can manage it." Ron absorbed this. "My dad says Dumbledore is the greatest wizard alive." "He might be," Harry said. "That's not really the question I'm asking." Ron thought about that for a while, staring at the window, and then nodded slowly, with the particular nod of someone turning something over and finding the shape of it different from what they expected. Harry liked him for not arguing the point. A lot of people would have argued the point. Outside, the countryside was getting wilder. The sorting was exactly as strange as advertised. Harry sat under the hat in front of a hall full of watching faces and felt the thing press down on his head and immediately start talking into his ear in a tone that suggested it had been waiting. "Ah," it said. "Now here's a puzzle. Feel free to think out loud," Harry thought back at it. "Courageous, certainly, not performing it, actually have it, that's rarer than you'd think. Loyal. Honest in ways that cost you. And a mind, a very particular kind of mind. You catalog things. You build structures. You plan." A pause. "Where would you like to go?" "Where should I go?" Different question from where you want. You know the difference. Gryffindor, Harry thought. Not because it was the brave choice or the expected one. Because Ron was there. Because Hermione would be there. Because whatever was coming, and something was coming, he could feel the shape of it in the stone on Quirrell's head and in the way Dumbledore had watched him at the staff table with an expression that was equal parts affection and calculation. He wanted people beside him who he already knew, and he knew these too, somehow, after one train ride. Some things you just know. Gryffindor it is, the hat said, with the satisfaction of something that has made a good match. One piece of advice, Mr. Potter, free of charge. The man at the center table, third from the left, do not let his certainty become yours. Then, aloud, to the hall, Gryffindor. The table erupted. Harry walked over and sat beside Ron and did not look at Dumbledore, though he felt the headmaster's gaze like the warmth of a fire, present, constant, and capable of burning. Hogwarts in September was a sensory experience that Harry approached with the same organized attention he'd been bringing to everything since July. He learned the castle by walking it, the shortcuts, the portraits that would talk to you if you talked to them first, the staircases that had opinions, the corridors that the ghost of a monk haunted at 3 a.m. for reasons the monk seemed unclear on himself. He learned the teachers the way you learn difficult terrain, where they were rigid, where they had flexibility, what they responded to. He learned which students were watching him because they were curious and which were watching him because they'd been asked to report back, and these were not always the people you'd expect. He was good at magic. He knew this within the first week. Not in the way of someone discovering a talent for the first time but in the way of someone discovering the name for something that was always there, the strange occurrences that had followed him his whole childhood suddenly organized into a framework, a grammar, a thing he could choose to do rather than simply experiencing things happening around him. When he performed a spell correctly it felt less like learning and more like remembering, which was its own kind of disorienting but mostly felt like relief. Professor McGonagall noticed. She had the careful eyes of someone who has been paying attention for decades and knows exactly what they're looking at, and she watched Harry in Transfiguration with a quality of attention that was different from the way she watched the other students, not warmer, exactly, but more complex. Like she was adding something up. On the third day of term she kept him after class. Mr. Potter. She sat behind her desk with her hands folded and her expression doing the thing where it was neutral but the neutrality itself communicated something. How are you settling in? Fine, thank you, Harry said. The will filing, she said. Not an accusation. Just naming it directly, the way she did everything. I want you to know that you will not face any academic consequences from it. Your place here is your own. I didn't think it wasn't, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. No. I suppose you didn't. She looked at him, really looked, the way Finch had looked, with the quality of someone seeing rather than categorizing. I was not aware, Mr. Potter. Of the will. Of the extent of the situation at your previous home. A pause that was fractionally longer than her usual pauses. I should have asked more questions. Harry looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. She didn't flinch from it. He respected that. I am asking now, she said. If there is anything you need, academically, pastorally, my door is open. Thank you, Professor, Harry said, and meant it, and left. In the corridor outside, he let himself feel it for a moment, the tiny, careful thing that was learning to exist in him, the thing that recognized an adult behaving like an adult and did not know entirely what to do with that information yet. He had Finch, who was brilliant and direct. He had Ragnarok, who was patient in the way of stones. He had Marcus Webb's file and Andromeda Tonk's voice through a proxy saying I'll take the boy the moment it's legal. He had Ron, who was loyally bewildered. He had Hermione, who was ferociously, productively curious. He was building something. He could feel it, the architecture of a life that was actually his, being constructed piece by piece out of the ruins of the arrangement someone else had made. He walked to Charms and let himself be pleased about McGonagall and then put it away and focused on the lesson, because there was always the lesson, and the lesson was always useful. The owl arrived on a Thursday morning in the third week of term. Harry was at breakfast when it came, a large, formal bird with a ministry seal on the letter, landing on the table in front of him with the deliberate precision of official correspondence. Ron watched it with interest. Hermione stopped buttering her toast. Harry opened it. It was a summons. Not an invitation, not a request, a formal summons to appear before the Wisengamot Inquiry Committee on the 14th of October, regarding the matter of the Potter will and the associated guardianship violation. It listed the parties under inquiry, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, and the matter of the administrative freeze on the Potter estate. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Finch, as expected. This is good. This is the formal accountability stage. Prepare to make a statement. We'll talk before. Harry folded it and put it in his robe pocket. Well? Ron said. The Wisengamot wants to have a formal inquiry, Harry said. I need to give a statement. Hermione set down her toast. In front of the full Wisengamot? Inquiry committee first. Then possibly the full Wisengamot depending on what the committee recommends. Harry, that's serious. I know, Harry said, reaching for his pumpkin juice. That's the point. Across the hall at the staff table, Dumbledore was reading what was presumably the same Owl's companion letter. Harry watched without appearing to watch, a skill he had spent years developing, and saw the way the headmaster's expression moved. Not shock. Not fear. Something more subtle than either, the expression of a man encountering a situation that has developed beyond his ability to quietly redirect it and is now in the business of choosing his ground. Their eyes met. Harry didn't look away. Dumbledore held his gaze for a moment, and then inclined his head, that small, gracious gesture that was both acknowledgement and performance, and returned to his breakfast. Harry looked back at his plate and thought, we're past the quiet management stage. The summons to Dumbledore's office arrived that afternoon, through the medium of a first-year who delivered it looking frightened, as though he had been selected for the task specifically because no one else would take it. The office was exactly what it should have been, circular, full of light, machines. Harry didn't know the purpose of making soft sounds on every surface, the sorting hat asleep on its shelf, the portraits of previous headmasters observing with the restrained curiosity of people who are pretending not to eavesdrop. Fawkes the Phoenix sat on his perch and regarded Harry with one bright eye. Dumbledore stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when Harry entered, and his face was the face of the newspapers and the portraits and the entire apparatus of his own legend, kind, weathered, brilliant, certain. Harry, he said. Thank you for coming. Please sit. I'll stand, Harry said. Not rudely. Just factually. A very small pause. Of course. Dumbledore moved to his chair behind the desk and sat. He looked at Harry with the patient, layered quality of someone who has conducted 1,000 of these conversations and knows how they go. I want to speak plainly with you. That would be new, Harry said. It landed. Dumbledore absorbed it without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. You're angry, he said. I'm not, actually, Harry said. I was expecting to be. I'm not. He looked at the headmaster. I'm just very clear. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The machines hummed. Fawkes shifted on his perch. What I did, placing you with your aunt, was not arbitrary. Your mother's sacrifice created a protection, a blood protection, anchored in Petunia as her nearest living blood relative. It was the most powerful barrier I could construct against Voldemort's return. I know, Harry said. You know. Finch explained the blood protection theory. It's in the supplementary documents from your 1981 Wisengamot filings, which are public record. Harry looked at him steadily. The protection is real. I understand that. But it didn't require the Dursleys to treat me the way they did, and it didn't require you to ignore my parents' will, and it didn't require you to freeze the estate so that no one would ask questions. The protection could have existed in other forms. He paused. You chose the simplest solution and you called it the only solution. They're not the same thing. The silence in the office was different from the silence before. Something had shifted in it, a quality of stillness that meant a man was thinking hard and not letting the thinking show. "You are very like your mother," Dumbledore said quietly. "I know," Harry said. She wrote it in italics. "Harry." And now the voice changed, became softer, more direct, shedding the warm authority of it like a layer of clothing. What was underneath was something Harry hadn't expected, something genuinely troubled. "There are things at work here that are larger than this inquiry. Voldemort is not gone. He is diminished, displaced, but not gone. You are the center of a prophecy that I have been holding close because I genuinely believe, that certain knowledge is a burden that should be given at the right moment." "I understand the theory," Harry said. "But you don't get to decide when the right moment is. That's my decision. You are 11 years old, and I filed legal documents that caused a Wizengamot inquiry in my second month of knowing the magical world existed," Harry said, without heat, without pride, just the plain fact of it. "I'm not asking for your permission to be involved in my own life. I'm telling you what I intend to do." He looked at Dumbledore with the same directness he had looked at Ragnarok's ledger watching on day one, the same directness he had looked at Marchbanks and Webb and the grey morning light in the kitchen at Privet Drive. "I intend to cooperate with the Wizengamot inquiry. I intend to tell the truth. I intend to pursue the serious black case review when the time is right. I intend to be a student here and learn magic and have something resembling a life." He paused. "I don't intend to pretend that the last decade was acceptable because the reason behind it was complicated." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. One of the portraits behind the desk, a former headmaster with a long silver beard and an expression of professional interest, made the very slight sound of someone who is suppressing the desire to applaud. "What would you have me do?" Dumbledore asked. It was a genuine question. Harry could hear that it was genuine, that the man was, in this moment, actually asking. And that surprised him more than any amount of authority or manipulation would have. He thought about it seriously. "Tell the Wizengamot the truth," Harry said. "Not the managed version. Not the narrative about greater goods and necessary choices. The actual truth, that you made a decision that violated my parents' explicit wishes and you told yourself it was for my protection, and some of it genuinely was, and some of it was about maintaining control of a situation you were afraid of." He held the headmaster's gaze. "I think you're a man who is so used to being the cleverest person in the room that you stopped checking whether the room agreed. Tell them that. It won't fix everything. But it will be true, and I think maybe you've needed to say it for a while." Another long silence. "You are," Dumbledore said, very quietly, "extraordinarily like your mother." "You keep saying that," Harry said. "I think you mean it as a warning to yourself." He left without waiting to be dismissed. Ron was in the common room when Harry got back, sprawled on the hearthrug with a charms essay half-finished beside him. Hermione was in the chair nearest the fire with 3 books open simultaneously, which was physically impressive. They both looked up when Harry came in. "How was it?" Ron asked. Harry sat on the hearthrug beside him. "Interesting." "Did he try to do the wise old grandfather thing?" "He tried several things," Harry said. "Did any of them work?" "Not particularly." Ron looked pleased with this in the direct, uncomplicated way that was one of his best qualities. Hermione set down the topmost book and looked at Harry with the careful expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd thought about. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Harry said. "Do you think Dumbledore is evil?" Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because it deserved seriousness. "No," he said. "I think he's very good at convincing himself that what he wants to do and what's right are the same thing. And I think he's been doing it so long that he's lost the ability to feel the gap between them." He paused. "Which is maybe more dangerous than being evil, actually. Evil knows what it's doing." Hermione looked at him. "That's very, don't say mature." I was going to say accurate, she said, with the small dignity of someone defending a word choice. Ron was quiet for a moment, doing the turning it over thing he did. Then he said, my dad's going to have some feelings about this when he hears about the Wizengamot summons. Your dad doesn't have to do anything, Harry said. He's Dumbledore's man through and through, Ron said, not defensively, honestly, which was the Weasley way, Harry was learning. Dad thinks the sun rises out of Dumbledore's, Ron, Hermione said. His general direction, Ron finished. He'll come around. He's good at coming around when the facts are what they are. It's Mum who'll take longer. He glanced at Harry sideways. She wrote him a letter, by the way. Last week, when the wireless ran the follow-up piece. I don't know what she said. Knowing your mother, Hermione said, it was thorough. It was 4 pages, Ron said. She let me read the first one. What did it say? Harry asked. Ron thought about it. Something like, Dumbledore should have known better, and she was surprised and disappointed, but the way she wrote it was more like being surprised at a person you thought was better than they turned out to be. Not surprised like it came from nowhere. Like she'd had a feeling but didn't want to believe it. He looked at Harry. I think a lot of people have had a feeling they didn't want to believe. Harry thought about that, about the weight of a feeling that a lot of people carry at once without naming it, and what happens when someone names it for them. He thought about Benedict Cross's measured voice and the pause before the next sentence. He thought about how the Daily Prophet had covered his first week at Hogwarts with a kind of reverent uncertainty, like they were watching something they hadn't expected and hadn't figured out how to characterize yet. He was not, he was aware, universally popular. Draco Malfoy had made that clear in approximately 48 hours, approaching Harry on the second day with the bright, precise cruelty of someone who has been raised to understand that status is a weapon and all relationships are negotiations. Harry had looked at him and seen someone performing confidence that required an audience to exist, and had said, politely and without malice, I'm not interested, and walked away, which had enraged Malfoy far more effectively than any argument would have. There were others, Slytherins, mostly, but not only, who watched Harry with the cold assessment of people whose families had built things under the old order and were not pleased to see it questioned. Pansy Parkinson said something pointed in potions that Harry didn't respond to, not because he couldn't but because she was not the problem he was solving right now, and he had limited attention and intended to spend it correctly. Snape was interesting. Snape was the most interesting problem Hogwarts had put in front of him so far. He arrived in potions on the first day and Snape called his name from the register and then looked up with those black, entirely opaque eyes and said, our new celebrity. And there was something in it, under the contempt, under the practiced cold authority, something that was watching Harry with a quality of attention that was not about Harry Potter the legend or Harry Potter the lawsuit but about something else, something private and consuming, and Harry filed it under complex and investigate later and got on with learning how to make a boil cure potion. He would get to Snape. He would get to a lot of things. First, the 14th of October. The night before the Wizengamot session, Harry sat in his dormitory long after Ron and the others had gone to sleep and read through his statement one more time. Finch had helped him draft it, had been clear that Harry should say what was true, not what was strategic, because in a Wizengamot inquiry the two were generally the same thing. Harry had written it himself and Finch had reviewed it and changed very little. It was 2 pages. It was very plain. It described 10 years at Privet Drive in the language of documentation rather than sentiment, specific incidents, specific dates where he had them, specific language that had been used and specific conditions that had existed. It did not ask for sympathy. It did not perform suffering. It simply told the Wizengamot what had happened, in the way that a person who has decided they are not ashamed of what was done to them, only of the fact that it was allowed, tells a thing. At the bottom, one paragraph that was not about the Dursleys at all, my parents left a will. They wrote it carefully and they sealed it with blood magic specifically because they were afraid it would be ignored. They were right to be afraid. Their wishes were set aside by a man who believed he knew better, in a decision that was never reviewed or questioned for a decade because the right people weren't asking. I am not asking the Wisengamot to punish anyone. I am asking them to look at what happened and say whether it was acceptable, because if it was acceptable then the law means nothing, and if it wasn't acceptable then something has to change. That seems like a simple enough question. He read it through once more. Then he folded it, put it beside his wand on the nightstand, and lay down in the dark. Outside the tower window, the grounds of Hogwarts spread out silver and enormous in the moonlight, the lake, the forest, the Quidditch pitch, the impossibly detailed reality of a place that was somehow his now, that he could walk every day, that was full of people he was beginning to know and magic he was beginning to understand. Ron made a small sound in his sleep. The fire in the grate had burned down to orange embers. Somewhere in the castle, a portrait walked between frames with the sound of distant footsteps. Harry thought about Dumbledore in his circular office with his machines humming. He thought about Fudge in the Ministry trying to construct a sentence that meant I signed it but didn't understand it without sounding like either a liar or an incompetent. He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban, 12 years now, which was a long time to be somewhere for something Harry did not yet know for certain he had done. He thought about Andromeda Tonks saying I'll take the boy the moment it's legal, which was a sentence he had thought about more than he'd admitted to anyone. He thought about his mother, who had been 21 years old when she wrote that will, who had sealed it with her own blood and hidden a witness stone in a blanket and tried every way she knew how to protect him across the boundary of her own death. She hadn't been able to stop what happened. But she had made sure it couldn't stay hidden forever. Harry closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would walk into the Wisengamot and read his 2 pages aloud in a room full of people who had spent a decade not asking questions about him, and the questions would have answers now, and the answers would matter, and the machinery his mother had set in motion 11 years ago would do what she had always intended it to do. He was not afraid. He was her son. Chapter 4, Fire and Testimony. The Wisengamot chamber was older than the Ministry building that housed it. Harry could feel that as soon as he walked in, the way old places have a weight to them that newer construction doesn't, a density in the air like the accumulated pressure of every serious thing that had ever been decided within those walls. The chamber was tiered, circular, lit by floating lights that cast everything in a blue-white that was neither warm nor cold but purely functional, the lighting of a room that had decided long ago that it was not interested in atmosphere. The Wisengamot members sat in their elevated rows in plum-colored robes, and there were more of them than Harry had expected, 50, 60, the rows stacked high enough that the people at the top were partly in shadow. At the center, a single chair with arms, facing the tiers. Harry had seen the chair in illustrations in the foundations of wizarding law. In the book it had looked procedural, just a piece of furniture. In the room it looked like what it was, the place where people sat when they had something to answer for, or something to say, and the entire weight of institutional authority looked down at them while they said it. Finch was beside him. Ragnarok, in a formal capacity representing Gringotts' legal interest in the estate matter, was to his left. Marcus Webb was already seated at a table to the side. The chamber was fuller than Harry expected. There were observers in the upper gallery, members of the press with quick quotes quills at the ready, and a low hum of conversation that moved through the room like weather. It stopped when Harry walked in. Not all at once, gradually, the way sound dies when something changes in a room, spreading outward from where he entered until the whole chamber was looking at him. He was still in his school robes, because Finch had said that was exactly right, not dress robes, not formal adult clothes, school robes. Let them see what he is, Finch had said. Let them see how old he is. Harry walked to the front of the chamber and sat in the chair. It didn't chain him, the way it had chained people accused of things. It just held him, which was its own kind of statement. Griselda Marchbanks sat at the head of the inquiry committee, 5 members at a curved table facing the tiered rows, positioned so that both the committee and the full Wisengamot could observe. She looked at Harry with the same expression she'd had during the Stone Review, a face that had done this 1,000 times and intended to do it correctly. Harry James Potter, she said, and her voice carried in the chamber without needing to be raised, the voice of someone who understood acoustics because she had spent decades in rooms like this one. You have been summoned as the principal complainant in the matter of the Potter estate guardianship inquiry. You are here to provide a statement and to answer questions from this committee. Do you understand the terms of your appearance? Yes, Harry said. You may proceed with your prepared statement. Harry reached into his robe. The 2 pages were folded precisely. He had folded them himself that morning in the dormitory, slowly, as though the care of the folding mattered. He unfolded them now and smoothed them on his knee and looked at the first line. Then he looked up at the chamber instead. He had read the statement so many times he didn't need the paper. He had known that since last night. The paper was not for reading from, it was for holding, because having something to hold when 50 people are looking at you was simply practical. My name is Harry Potter, he said. I'm 11 years old. I've been a student at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for approximately 6 weeks. Before that, I lived at number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, with my mother's sister and her family. His voice was steady. Not performed steady, genuinely steady, with the quiet of someone who has already processed the emotion of a thing and is now simply reporting it. I didn't know I was a wizard until a man named Hagrid came to a beach hut in July and told me. I didn't know anything about the magical world, nothing about Hogwarts, nothing about my parents beyond what the Dursleys told me, which was that they died in a car crash. I didn't know about my parents until a goblin named Ragnarok pulled me aside at Gringotts and showed me a vault that Albus Dumbledore didn't know existed. The chamber was completely silent. The will is very clear. My parents chose Sirius Black as my guardian. They named 2 alternatives. They explicitly excluded my aunt and uncle by name, with reasons. My mother added an addendum 3 days before she died, and if you've read the certified copy, you know what it says. He paused. The will was not honored. Nobody was consulted. I was left on a doorstep in November with a letter and a blanket and a witness stone my mother had hidden in the blanket's lining because she was afraid of exactly this outcome. He stopped for a moment. Not because emotion was overtaking him, because he wanted the chamber to sit with it, the image of that November night, the doorstep, the blanket. I am not going to describe what the stone recorded in detail. You have the certified evidence summary from Arbiter Marchbank's review. I'll just say that it was consistent with what my mother was afraid of, and that she was right to be afraid, and that nobody asked. For 10 years and 8 months, nobody asked. I was the most famous child in the wizarding world and nobody from the ministry or from this institution ever came to number 4 Privet Drive and asked if I was all right. A member of the committee, a heavy-set wizard in the second row of the tiers, shifted in his seat. Several quick quills were moving rapidly. I want to be precise about what I'm asking for, Harry said. I'm not asking you to ruin Albus Dumbledore. He is a great wizard. He has done extraordinary things. I understand the reasoning behind the blood protection, I've read the documentation. The protection was real. But real protection and my parents' explicit wishes were not mutually exclusive, and the decision not to look for a way to honor both of them was a choice someone made without asking me, without asking my parents' designated guardians, and without review. He looked at the committee, then let his gaze travel up the tiers. The law has a blood seal provision because the people who wrote it understood that powerful people make decisions about vulnerable people and call it wisdom. The provision exists to say that some decisions are not yours to make. I'm asking this body to say whether that provision means anything. He folded his statement and held it on his knee. That's all I have, he said. The questions took 45 minutes. Some were gentle, committee members who had clearly already made up their minds and were using their questions to build the record rather than to probe. Some were harder, pushed by members who were not hostile but were genuinely uncertain, asking about the blood protection theory, about whether the placement had any legal justification, about what Harry understood of the circumstances of Sirius Black's imprisonment. Harry answered everything directly. When he didn't know something, he said he didn't know. When he had an opinion, he offered it as an opinion. When a committee member named Tiberius Ogden, old, sharp-eyed, the kind of sharp that only comes from decades of actually paying attention, asked him what outcome he wanted for Dumbledore specifically, Harry thought about the office, about the machines and the portraits and the "you are very like your mother," and said, accountability. I don't think he should lose his position here. He's a good teacher and Hogwarts is his life's work. But the political authority, the Wisengamot seat, the supreme mugwump title, those were never just honorary. They meant that whatever Dumbledore decided was effectively backed by this institution. That can't continue. Not without a review of how that authority was used. He paused. A man can be extraordinary and still have needed someone to tell him no. I'm asking this body to be that no, retroactively. Ogden wrote something in his notes and didn't ask a follow-up, which felt like agreement. Then a voice from the upper tiers said, with respect, Mr. Potter, you are 11 years old. Harry looked up. The speaker was a witch in the fourth row, angular face, ministry badge, the tight-wound quality of someone who manages their emotions the way you manage an overcrowded diary. Umbridge, her plaque read. Dolores Umbridge. Yes, Harry said. Do you not think that perhaps an 11-year-old's perspective on complex institutional decisions is limited? Probably, Harry said. But the witness stone that recorded my life isn't 11. The blood-sealed will isn't 11. The Guardian Designation Act of 1692 isn't 11. He looked at her steadily. My age is the reason this had to wait this long. It's not a reason to dismiss what's in the record. A murmur moved through the chamber. Umbridge's expression went through something that wasn't quite adjustment, more like recalculation. Marchbanks said, with the finality of a door closing, "Thank you, Mr. Potter. You may step down while we hear from the next party." Harry stepped down and went back to the bench beside Finch, who said nothing but put a hand briefly on his shoulder, and the touch of it was so straightforward and quiet that Harry almost lost the stillness he'd been holding. He recovered it in 2 seconds flat. He was getting better at that. Dumbledore arrived. He came through the chamber doors with the unhurried pace of someone who had entered rooms like this one more times than anyone present could count, and the quality of attention he drew was different from the attention Harry had drawn. Where Harry's entrance had been silence, the sudden, surprised kind, Dumbledore's entrance was the sound of an entire room adjusting to a presence it knew. He was in his full robes, deep blue, stars, the whole architecture of his own significance, and he moved to the center of the chamber without being directed, because he knew where the chair was. Of course he did, he had probably sat in that chair more than anyone alive. He sat, and he looked at the committee, and he waited. Marchbanks read the formal charge. Blood seal violation. Guardian designation noncompliance. Estate administrative freeze via undisclosed proxy. Dumbledore listened with his hands folded in his lap and his face in the expression of a man who has prepared himself thoroughly for something unpleasant and has arrived ready. Albus Dumbledore, Marchbanks said. You may make your opening statement. Thank you, Griselda, he said, first name, long familiarity, not casual but genuine. I will be brief. He looked at the chamber. Not at Harry, at the chamber, as a whole, with the sweeping, encompassing gaze of a man addressing a body rather than a collection of individuals. I violated James and Lily Potter's will, he said. The chamber didn't gasp. It went still instead, which was louder. Not accidentally. Not through ignorance. I knew the will existed. I knew its provisions. I made a decision that the blood protection afforded by placing Harry with his mother's family was more important than those provisions, and I arranged for the estate freeze to prevent legal complications that would have drawn attention to the placement. He paused. I believed I was right. I want to be honest about that. I'm not standing before you saying I didn't know what I was doing. I knew precisely what I was doing and I was convinced it was necessary. Tiberius Ogden leaned forward. And now? Now, Dumbledore said, and for the first time something moved in his expression, something that wasn't the armor of his own certainty, something underneath. I have sat with a boy in my office who told me things about my own decision-making that I had not permitted myself to hear, and I am less convinced than I was. He looked, very briefly, at Harry. The protection was real. The threat was real. But Harry's point, that the two goals were not mutually exclusive, that I chose the simplest path and called it the only path, is not one I can refute cleanly. The chamber absorbed this. Several members were writing. Several were perfectly still. There is also, Dumbledore said, the matter of Sirius Black. The temperature in the room shifted at the name. Sirius Black did not receive a trial, Dumbledore said. He said it evenly, the way you say a thing you have decided to say regardless of the consequences. I was aware of this. I did not intervene. I believed, on the available evidence at the time, and I want to be clear that I was working under conditions of profound chaos in the hours after Voldemort's fall, I believed he was guilty. I have since reviewed the material and I am no longer certain. A man who is not certain of guilt should not have allowed 12 years in Azkaban without pushing for a trial. That is also on me. The murmur that went through the chamber this time was different, deeper, less controlled, the sound of a room encountering something it hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to process. 3 committee members were talking quietly to each other behind raised notes. Ogden was very still. Fudge, seated in the ministerial observation box to the right of the tiers, had gone an extraordinary color. Cornelius, Dumbledore said, without turning toward him but in a tone that made the address unmistakable, the co-signature on Fletcher's motion will need to be addressed. I would encourage you to be forthcoming about the nature of your involvement. Fudge stood. He had the expression of a man whose carefully constructed alibi has just been removed by the person who helped him build it. Albus, I am making my statement, Dumbledore said, with a gentleness that was somehow more devastating than any sharpness would have been. You will have your opportunity. Fudge sat. The session broke for recess at 1:30. Harry was in the corridor outside the chamber with Finch and Ragnock, eating a sandwich someone from Finch's office had brought, which struck him as an extremely practical thing to have thought of. That was not what I expected, Finch said. He was in the particular state of a man who is professionally impressed and slightly irritated about it. He fell on his own sword. Carefully, selectively, but he fell on it. That changes the committee's calculus significantly. He still protected himself, Ragnock said. The admission on Black is significant, it opens a review. But he framed every admission as a considered decision made under extraordinary circumstances. He is not performing guilt. He is performing honesty, which is more effective. Can they both be real? Harry said. Finch looked at him. What? Can someone be genuinely honest about something and also strategically honest about it at the same time? A pause. Finch and Ragnock looked at each other. Yes, Finch said. That is, in fact, the most dangerous kind of honesty. I know, Harry said. I'm not saying it invalidates anything. I'm saying it means the committee will be more sympathetic than they might have been if he tried to defend himself. He looked at the corridor wall, old stone, torchlight, the particular wizarding ministry aesthetic of importance attempting to be ancient. Which means the outcome for Dumbledore will be gentler than it might have been. Which is, I think that's okay, actually. I said in there that I wasn't asking for his ruin. I meant it. Finch folded his hands and gave Harry the look he occasionally gave him, the look that meant you should be 45 years old and you are 11 and I find this professionally destabilizing. What matters, he said, is the institutional outcome. Whatever happens to Dumbledore personally, the committee must make a ruling on the guardianship violation that has precedential weight. The blood seal protection has to mean something after today. And Black? Ragnock said. Black is a separate matter that Dumbledore just opened, Finch said. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement will be compelled to respond to that admission. The review that Webb's committee requested in August just became significantly harder to ignore. He looked at Harry. Black potentially getting a trial is now a real possibility. I want you to have measured expectations about the timeline. Azkaban cases move slowly, but it's moving. Harry thought about the name in his parents' will. Sirius Black, chosen guardian, first choice, the person his father had trusted above everyone else. He thought about 12 years in Azkaban for something that might not have happened the way the record said it did. He thought about what it meant to spend 12 years in that place, dementors and darkness and the cold, and what a person would be like coming out of it. He thought, one thing at a time. Good, he said. Let's go back in. The afternoon session was where Fudge fell apart. He was questioned by Ogden, who had the particular quality of an old man with nothing left to protect. He had seen too much and was too old to care about careers, his own or anyone else's. He asked Fudge about the co-signature in the measured, unhurried tone of someone who had already read the answer in the documents and was giving Fudge the opportunity to agree with it. Fudge tried the routine filing defense. He tried it twice, in 2 different versions. Ogden let him finish both times and then said, "Minister, are you in the habit of co-signing routine filings submitted by individuals whose relationship to the ministry is, shall we say, irregular?" Mundungus Fletcher's motion was submitted through proper channels. Mundungus Fletcher has 3 outstanding ministry citations for unlicensed trading in magical artifacts, Ogden said pleasantly. His relationship with proper channels is, at best, occasional. Fudge went the color of uncooked gammon. The co-signature, Ogden continued, is what gave the administrative freeze the appearance of legitimacy. Without it, the freeze could have been challenged at any point in the past decade by any Gringotts arbiter with access to the estate documents. With it, challenges were deflected by the apparent backing of ministerial authority. He looked at Fudge over his glasses. You may not have understood the full implications when you signed. But you understood enough to sign when Dumbledore asked, and you chose not to ask what you were signing. Is that an accurate characterization? A very long silence. I trusted Albus Dumbledore's judgment, Fudge said finally. The tone of a man selecting a defense that is humiliating but survivable. As did many of us, Ogden said. The difference is that most of us were not asked to co-sign documents. The gallery above made a sound. Not laughter, something more complicated, the compressed breath of a room absorbing something. Umbridge, Harry noticed, was watching Fudge with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Almost. Beneath it was the careful, assessing quality of someone making calculations about a structure that was developing cracks and what that might mean for their own position within it. He noted it and moved on. What happened in the late afternoon was the part nobody had planned for. A witch in the 3rd tier, older, gray-haired, wearing the badge of a Wisengamot elder Harry didn't know, stood and addressed Marchbanks directly, bypassing the committee process. Her name, Harry would learn later, was Eugenia Rosier. She had been on the Wisengamot for 30 years. She had voted on the emergency measures that granted Dumbledore his extraordinary wartime authority in 1979. She had, apparently, spent some time thinking about that. Madam Marchbanks, she said, I move that this inquiry produce a formal ruling on the scope of the Supreme Mugwump's authority to make unilateral decisions affecting named minor heirs. Specifically, I move that any such decision be subject to mandatory review by this body rather than individual discretion. Retroactive review in this case to follow. She looked at the committee. The question before us is not only what was done to this boy. It is what we made possible by not having a mechanism to prevent it. The chamber was very, very still. Seconded, said Ogden, immediately. The vote on the motion, procedural, non-binding in itself, but consequential as a signal, passed in 4 minutes. 38 for. 12 against. 7 abstentions. Harry sat in the observer's bench and watched it happen and did not let himself feel it fully, because feeling it fully right now would have been a distraction, and he could feel it later, in private, where it wouldn't matter that it showed. They reconvened for the committee's preliminary findings at 4 o'clock. Marchbanks read them in the same tone she used for everything, factual, direct, no flourishes. The blood seal violation was confirmed. The guardian designation non-compliance was confirmed. The administrative freeze was confirmed as having been obtained through procedurally valid but ethically compromised means. Formal censure of Albus Dumbledore on all 3 counts. Suspension of his supreme mugwump authority pending a full Wisengamot review of the scope of that authority, to be scheduled within 60 days. His Wisengamot seat suspended for the same period. His position as Hogwarts headmaster explicitly not affected. Marchbanks read this clearly, twice, which told Harry she had anticipated the question. The Dursleys were referred to the Ministry's Muggle Liaison Office for investigation with the recommendation that the evidence be shared with appropriate Muggle authorities. The language of the recommendation was not gentle. The Sirius Black case was referred to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for mandatory review, citing Dumbledore's testimony regarding the absence of trial. The recommendation included the phrase fundamental miscarriage of justice, which was not committee boilerplate. Someone had written that deliberately. These findings will be submitted to the full Wisengamot for ratification within 30 days, Marchbanks said. This concludes the preliminary session. She looked up from the document. She looked at Harry. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her expression, not warm, exactly, but doing something in the direction of recognition, of one person seeing another clearly, said everything. Harry nodded. She nodded back. Outside the chamber, in the grey ministry corridor with the gold letters on the walls and the fountains and the hum of a building that processed the business of a country, Harry stood with Finch and Ragnock and felt the afternoon settle around him. Finch was making notes. Ragnock was expressionless, which meant he was satisfied. Several journalists were attempting to approach from the atrium. Harry could see Rita Skeeter's distinctive acid green robes at the edge of the crowd, and Finch's junior associate was managing the approach with the professional barricading technique of someone who had done it before. The full ratification vote is 30 days, Finch said, writing without looking up. Dumbledore's people will lobby the members in the interim. The outcome isn't certain. It's likely, Ragnock said. Likely is not certain. Nothing is certain, Ragnock said. Likely is sufficient. The Black Review, Harry said. Finch looked up. Will take time. Azkaban cases have their own process, there's a review board, there are ministry protocols. The unspeakables have involvement because of the original conviction's wartime context. He paused. But Marchbanks used miscarriage of justice. She doesn't use language like that without intention. Someone on that committee wants it resolved. How long? Months. Maybe spring. Harry thought about spring. He thought about Hogwarts in spring, what it might look like, what he might know by then that he didn't know now. He thought about the first Quidditch match that was coming up, which McGonagall had told him about after catching him flying at a level that clearly surprised her, and about the Nimbus 2000 that had arrived at breakfast 2 days ago and was currently in the dormitory being admired by Ron with an intensity that bordered on religious. He thought about the third-floor corridor and the three-headed dog he had accidentally discovered on the first-floor exploration, which was clearly guarding something, which he had been cataloguing for future investigation. He thought about Quirrell's turban and the sharp wrongness that emanated from it every time Harry was near the man. He thought about the stone in Vault 713, which Hagrid had taken out the day Harry first visited Gringotts, which was now somewhere in this castle, and about the fact that he had put that detail in his mind marked will matter later, and it was beginning to feel like later was moving closer. I need to get back to school, he said. The press, Finch started. One statement, Harry said. Short. Then I need to go. He walked toward Rita Skeeter before Finch could argue about it, which was the correct strategy, let her come to him and he'd be walking backward all day. She materialized out of the crowd with her quick quotes quill and her wide, sharp smile and said, Mr. Potter, 3 questions, Harry said. Make them useful. She blinked, the blink of someone who had not expected to be managed and was deciding whether to be impressed or annoyed. She chose impressed, which was the right call. The censure, is it enough? It's a start, Harry said. Sirius Black deserves a trial. He never had one. That's not a position, it's a fact. And Dumbledore, are you satisfied with the outcome? Harry thought about it for one honest second. I'm satisfied that the inquiry was real and that the findings are real and that things have to change. Whether I'm satisfied depends on what happens in 30 days. He paused. I'm 11. I have time to see how it turns out. Skeeter looked at him with an expression that was as close to genuine as he suspected she was capable of. For what it's worth, she said, at a volume below her usual performance register, you were very good in there. I was telling the truth, Harry said. It's the easiest thing to be good at. He nodded to her and walked back through the ministry atrium, past the fountain with its golden statues, past the fireplaces throwing green flow light, past the walls of gold lettering and the moving memos and all the elaborate machinery of institutional authority, and found the lift that went to the surface. Outside, London was doing what London does in October, grey and busy and thoroughly uninterested in the internal politics of institutions most of its inhabitants didn't know existed. Harry stood on the pavement and breathed the cold air and felt the day settling into his bones like something earned. His parents had tried to protect him. The machinery had failed. He had walked into the room where the failure was housed, sat in the chair, and said what was true, and 50 people in plum-colored robes had listened. The machinery was moving now. He pulled his robe tighter against the October cold and turned back toward the flue entrance, back toward Hogwarts, back toward Ron and Hermione and the Nimbus in the dormitory and the three-headed dog on the third floor and all the particular business of being alive in a world that was, it turned out, significantly more interesting than a cupboard under the stairs. He was not done. But today was done, and today had been enough. Chapter 5, The Choice Beneath the Castle. November arrived at Hogwarts the way it always does in Scotland, without apology, replacing October's crisp clarity with a persistent grey that settled into the stones of the castle and made the torches burn more orange by contrast. The lake went the colour of hammered pewter. The forest closed in on itself. Students moved between classes in tighter clusters, scarves appearing from trunks, and the common room fire became the social centre of gravity it would remain until spring. Harry barely noticed the weather. He was watching Quirrell. He had been watching Quirrell since September, with the low continuous attention of someone who has identified a wrong note in a piece of music and cannot unhear it. Every time he was near the man, in the corridors, at meals, in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom where Quirrell taught with the nervous, stuttering energy of someone performing incompetence, Harry felt it. A pressure behind his scar, faint but consistent, like a bruise being pressed. And something else, something harder to name, a sense of wrongness that wasn't about Quirrell's personality or teaching style but about what was living behind his eyes. "You're doing it again," Hermione said. They were in the library, textbooks spread between them. Ron was theoretically working on a transfiguration essay and was in practice drawing something on his parchment that looked like a Quidditch play diagram. "Doing what?" Harry said. "Watching the staff table." She didn't look up from her book. "Specifically Professor Quirrell. You've been doing it since September." "His turban," Harry said. "What about it?" "It smells wrong. It's the wrong weight for a cloth turban. And he flinches when Snape sits near him, not the way someone flinches from someone they dislike. The way someone flinches from something that causes them pain." He kept his voice low, not from secrecy exactly, but from the habit of being precise. "Something is wrong with Quirrell." Ron looked up from his Quidditch diagram. "You think he's up to something?" "I think something is using him," Harry said. "I don't know what yet." Hermione finally looked up. Her expression was the one she wore when she was doing rapid calculations and the answer was coming out larger than she expected. "The third-floor corridor," she said. "The dog is guarding something," Harry said. "And whatever Hagrid took from Vault 713 the day I was at Gringotts ended up here." Hagrid basically said as much. He let it slip in October that it was moved to Hogwarts for safekeeping. "Hagrid let it slip," Ron repeated, with the tone of someone who had known Hagrid long enough to find this entirely believable. "I've been doing some reading," Hermione said. She was using her careful voice, the one she used when she had found something that concerned her and was deciding how to present it. She reached into her bag and produced a library book, moderately ancient, with a spine that read magical artifacts of the medieval period. She had it open to a page with a small illustration, a roughly oval stone, annotated in cramped Latin. The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel's Stone. It produces the elixir of life. It's the only known substance that can restore a destroyed or dying body to full strength. She looked at Harry. If Voldemort's spirit is somehow attached to Quirrell, and if the stone is in this castle, he's here for the stone, Harry said. It wasn't a revelation so much as confirmation, the shape of the thing he'd been building since September clicking into its final form. And he's going to make his move before the end of term, because after December the school is too empty to move without being seen. The three of them sat with this for a moment. We should tell Dumbledore, Hermione said. Or McGonagall. Dumbledore knows, Harry said. The protections on the 3rd floor, they're not Filch's work. They're serious enchantments. Dumbledore set them up specifically. He knows what's in there and he knows someone is trying to get at it. So why hasn't he done something about Quirrell? Because he doesn't know it's Quirrell, Harry said. He knows someone is trying. He doesn't know who. He paused. Snape knows, or suspects. That's why Quirrell flinches, Snape has been watching him. But Snape is complicated, and whatever he's doing about it, he hasn't told Dumbledore in a way that's produced action. Ron frowned. How do you know what Snape knows? Harry thought about how to explain it, the way he watched Snape watching Quirrell at meals, the quality of Snape's attention during the Quidditch match in October when Quirrell was in the stands and Harry's broom had started behaving strangely, the way Snape had muttered a counter-curse that Harry had seen without being meant to see it. I pay attention, he said simply. Hermione was quiet for a moment, turning pages. Harry. If we're right, if Voldemort is actually in this castle, shouldn't we be more frightened than we currently are? Harry thought about it genuinely. Probably, he said. Are you? She considered. A bit. Less than I expected to be. Me too, Ron said, which surprised Harry and clearly surprised Ron slightly as well. I think maybe if you've grown up hearing about him long enough he stops being a horror story and starts being a problem. And problems you can do things about. Harry looked at his two best friends, because they were that, unmistakably, in the way of things that announce themselves through sheer accumulated evidence, and felt something he didn't have a clean word for. The nearest approximation was grateful, but it was larger than that. Here's what we do, he said. What they did, in the first instance, was research. Hermione attacked the library with the systematic intensity of a military campaign. She emerged 3 days later with notes on Flamel, on the stone's known history, on the enchantments associated with Dumbledore's specific school of magic, and on the theoretical behavior of a partially destroyed soul attached to a living host. The last section she had written in smaller handwriting, as though making it physically smaller made it less alarming. Harry researched Quirrell, not through books but through observation, which was his preferred method. He tracked the man's movements during off hours, noting when he was absent from the staff table, which routes through the castle he used most frequently, how he behaved in proximity to the 3rd floor corridor versus the rest of the castle. The answer was clear. Quirrell went near the corridor at night, twice in the 2nd week of November, and came back looking like someone who had pushed against something very heavy and not managed to move it. Whatever's protecting the stone, Harry told Hermione and Ron, he can't get through yet. The protections are holding. But he's going to keep trying, Hermione said. He's going to try harder as he gets more desperate, Harry said. And Voldemort, whatever's left of him, is going to push Quirrell harder as the year goes on. He's not a patient, he paused, because person wasn't right, entity. Ron was quiet for a moment. What do we do when Quirrell gets through? Tell someone then. We're not going to let him get through, Harry said. Another pause. Right, Ron said, in the tone of someone who has decided to be brave primarily because the alternative is more troubling. Obviously. November deepened. The Quidditch season brought welcome noise and distraction, Harry's first match against Slytherin ended in a catch so fast that Madam Hooch checked his broom for a summoning charm before she believed he'd actually seen the snitch, and the celebration in the common room that night was the loudest thing Harry had ever been part of, full of the warm undiscriminating happiness of 200 people temporarily united by something trivial, which was its own kind of magic. He was good at Quidditch the way he was good at paying attention, not because of talent alone but because he was genuinely present during it, his mind fully occupied by a problem that moved at 40 feet in the air and had wings. Dumbledore came to the match. He sat in the staff box and watched, and after it was over he found Harry briefly at the edge of the pitch while the rest of the team was still celebrating, and he said, quietly, "Well played, Harry." "Thank you," Harry said. They stood for a moment. The November sky above the pitch was the particular dark blue of late afternoon, and the crowd was dispersing in good-natured noise. "The ratification vote is in 12 days, Dumbledore said. He was not looking at Harry when he said it but at the sky. "I know. I want you to know that I intend to accept the outcome, whatever it is. I will not lobby against it." He paused. "I thought you should hear that directly rather than through press reports." "Okay," Harry said. Then, because it was true, "Thank you." "I am trying," Dumbledore said, and the words were simpler than anything he had said in their previous conversation, less architecture to them, less construction, just the plain present-tense statement of a man reporting on his own efforts. "I am not always certain I am trying the right things in the right ways. But I am trying." "I know," Harry said. "I can tell the difference." Dumbledore looked at him then, briefly. "Can you?" "Yes," Harry said. "You're not performing it." The performance was better. "This is Messier." Something moved across Dumbledore's face that was not quite a smile. He nodded once, and walked back toward the castle, and Harry watched him go and thought, that's what it looks like when a person is doing actual work. He filed it. He went to celebrate with his team. The break-in attempt came on a Friday night in late November, 2 days after the first proper snowfall, when the castle was quieter than usual because half the upper-year students had taken advantage of a Hogsmeade weekend permission that the first-years couldn't use. Harry was awake. He was nearly always awake after midnight, another habit from Privet Drive, where the night had been the only time that was reliably his, and he was sitting in bed reading a defense against the dark arts supplementary text that Flitwick had recommended when his scar flared. Not the faint pressure of proximity. Full, sharp, sudden, the difference between a bruise and a burn. He was out of bed before he'd consciously decided to move. He shook Ron awake with one hand and grabbed his wand with the other. Ron came awake with the immediate, instinctive readiness of someone who had grown up in a house full of brothers and had learned that sudden disturbances required quick orientation. He looked at Harry's face and was out of bed in 3 seconds. "The corridor," Harry said. They didn't knock on Hermione's dormitory door. Harry sent a Wingardium Leviosa at a small stone on the windowsill that they had designated as a signal, levitating it against her window. He didn't know if it would work or if she'd be awake to see it. He moved toward the portrait hole. She was in the common room already, wand in hand, her hair enormous and her expression completely focused. She had the same book of Flamel research tucked under her arm. "I heard someone on the stairs," she said. "Going up, not down." "Quirrell's going for the corridor," Harry said. "Now. Tonight?" "Now. Tonight." They looked at each other. "McGonagall," Ron said. "Not enough time," Harry said. "And Quirrell knows the castle. He'd be through before she got there." He looked at his two friends, the firelight making the common room warm and small, Hogwarts silent around them, and said, "You don't have to come." "Don't be stupid," Ron said. "Categorically not," Hermione said. Harry felt it again, that large thing without a clean word. He nodded. They went. The third-floor corridor was cold. Not ordinary castle cold, the specific cold of a place where significant magic had been worked and was actively working, where the air had a pressure to it. The door at the end of the corridor stood ajar, which it had not done the one time Harry had been here before. Through the gap came a sound, low, rhythmic, slightly wrongly cadenced. The three-headed dog was asleep. Not naturally. There was a harp playing itself in the corner, enchanted, producing the particular slow melody that sent Fluffy, as Hagrid had called the creature in one of his more revealing accidental conversations, under. Quirrell had done that. Quirrell was through the trapdoor that Fluffy guarded, which meant he was already inside whatever lay beneath. Harry looked at the trapdoor. It was open, yes. But it had also closed once while open, before, which meant Fluffy could wake before Quirrell came back through it. The harp will stop eventually, Hermione said, reading his thinking. Once it stops, Fluffy wakes up. We have time, Harry said. Let's go. We're going down there, Ron said. Not a question. He was already moving toward the trapdoor. The drop was longer than it looked, which turned out not to matter because the devil's snare at the bottom broke their fall and then immediately tried to kill them, which mattered considerably. Hermione dealt with it inside 3 seconds with a bluebell fire charm that she produced with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent the past 2 months reading about exactly this possibility. The plant released them. They landed on cold stone. Second task, Hermione said, brushing Devil's snare off her robes. She had a list in her head, Harry could see her running through it. She had memorized Dumbledore's probable protection sequence from her research, which was, in the current moment, one of the most useful things another person had ever done for him. The chamber ahead was birds and keys, a massive locked door at the far end and a swarm of winged keys in the space between. Harry was in the air on a school broom before Ron or Hermione had finished assessing the room, because the problem was clear, the right key, the door, the broom, and clear problems didn't need to be discussed. He found it in 40 seconds, a large iron key with a bent wing, and the door opened. The chess game was the one that stopped them in the sense that it required real time and real thought. The chess set was enormous, each piece twice human height, and it became immediately apparent that it needed to be played to completion by human players standing on the board. Ron looked at it for a moment. Then he said, with the authority of someone who has known this subject intimately since childhood, right. Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, you're a castle. I'm the knight. Ron, Hermione said, if a piece gets taken, I know, he said. He was looking at the board with the expression Harry had come to recognize, the total, clear focus Ron brought to chess, where everything else fell away and he became purely strategic. I know how to win this. It's going to be unpleasant. Trust me. They played. Ron was extraordinary. Harry watched him from across the board and understood, for the first time with full clarity, what it meant to have a tactical mind, the way Ron could see 6 moves ahead without appearing to calculate, the way his pieces moved with an absolute conviction that came from knowing the game in his bones. The white pieces were aggressive, precise, and Ron was better. He always had the answer before they made the problem. The moment came when Harry had seen it coming, the moment when Ron had to sacrifice himself to give Harry a clear path to checkmate. He had positioned himself there deliberately, Harry realized. He had known since the 3rd move. Ron, Harry said. Checkmate in 2 from there, Ron said. He was looking at the board, not at Harry. His voice was steady. Don't argue about it. I'm not arguing, Harry said. Thank you. Ron looked at him then, briefly. A look that contained several things, affection, the particular pride of someone doing the thing they're genuinely best at in a moment that counts, and something that recognized the gravity of what they were all doing without being frightened by it. Go, he said. The knight takes the queen. Then you move. Then checkmate. Harry moved. The white queen took Ron's knight with a collision that sent Ron skidding across the stone floor. Hermione made a sound and went toward him. He was alive, Harry could see him breathing, see him raising a hand to wave her off. Go, Ron said again, his voice slightly strained. Both of you, go. One of us needs to stay, Harry said. I'll stay, Hermione said, already beside Ron, her medical knowledge minimal but her presence worth something. She looked up at Harry. You need to go. I think you need to go alone. Harry looked at her. Then at Ron on the stone floor, hand raised in a wave that was also a dismissal. He went. The troll was already unconscious, something had dealt with it already, which meant Quirrell was ahead of him and had been moving fast. Harry went through the chamber without slowing down and hit the final door, and the last protection was a logic puzzle, a row of potions, a riddle about the one that would let him through and the one that would let him back. Hermione would have loved it. Harry solved it in under 2 minutes because his mother had been the most talented charms practitioner of her generation and she had apparently also been extremely good at logic and he had inherited, it turned out, more than just her eyes. He drank. He went through. The room beyond the mirror was smaller than the others, and warmer, lit by fire, and Quirrell was there. Not struggling. Not searching. Standing in front of the mirror of Eriste, large, golden-framed, ancient, with his hands at his sides and his expression tight with something that was not quite his own feeling, the way a person's face looks when someone else is driving. He turned when Harry entered, and Harry saw it again, the wrongness, the extra layer behind his eyes, the thing that was not Quirrell. You, Quirrell said. Then, with a shift in register that was like a frequency change, him. Harry had his wand up. He had had it up since the trapdoor. You're not going to get the stone, Harry said. Quirrell looked at the mirror. I can't see it, he said, with a frustration that belonged to both of them and neither of them. I can see myself presenting it, can see what I want, but I can't see where it is. He turned back to Harry, and something focused in his face that was older and sharper and more deliberate than anything Quirrell had ever managed in a classroom. The boy, it said, through Quirrell's mouth. The boy who knows about blood-sealed wills and Wisengamot inquiries. Tell me, does courage feel different when you're looking at something worth being afraid of? I don't know, Harry said. I haven't been afraid yet. A pause. The fire in the room made the shadows move. That is either a lie, it said, or the most interesting thing anyone has said to me in a very long time. Look in the mirror, Harry said. Quirrell's head tilted. You can't see the stone because you want to use it, Harry said. He had figured this out between the chess room and here, the mirror showed desire, what you wanted most of all, and Dumbledore's protection was elegant in the way that magic is elegant when someone really understands what they're doing. You can only see it if you want to find it but not use it. He met the thing's gaze through Quirrell's eyes. Which means you can't get it. Not by looking. Then perhaps I should simply take it from someone who can, it said. I'm not going to look in the mirror for you. No, it agreed. I didn't think you would. It moved Quirrell's body toward him, and Harry felt the scar ignite, not a flare but a sustained burn, the presence of something that had touched this scar before, that was connected to it in a way Harry didn't fully understand yet but felt in the way you feel a thing in your whole body rather than just your mind. You are very interesting, Harry Potter. You have been, this whole year, so interesting. You do not hide. You do not apologize. You stand in rooms where you are supposed to feel small and you simply, don't. Should I? Harry said. A sound through Quirrell that was almost a laugh. No, it said. No, I think not. I think that is what you are, what you have always been, and what I will have to account for, eventually. It paused. Not today. Today, Harry said. And he moved. Not because he had a plan beyond emotion, not because he knew what would happen when he grabbed Quirrell's arm, only that the inertia of the moment demanded action and standing still was not something Harry Potter did when something needed doing. His hand closed on Quirrell's wrist and the effect was immediate and bilateral. Quirrell screamed, a sound that was two voices layered wrong, and Harry's scar became agony, absolute and total, but he held on because letting go was not the option. The magic between them was not a spell. It was a conflict in the literal sense, two things that could not occupy the same space, the love-death protection that lived in Harry's skin meeting the thing that had made that protection necessary. The fire of it moved up Harry's arm and through his chest, and he held on because he had decided to hold on, and he did not revise decisions under pressure, and Quirrell's flesh where Harry's fingers closed was blistering and crumbling, an effect Harry had not anticipated and did not flinch from, and the screaming in the room was both of them now. He did not let go until Quirrell fell. What left the room in the instant after, dark, cold, a rush of something displaced, was not Quirrell. Quirrell was already past help. What left moved through Harry like a wind and was gone, and the scar went from agony to silence in the same moment, and Harry's legs became a decision he could not enforce, and he sat down on the stone floor next to the mirror of Eriste and looked at himself in it. He was expecting desire. He was expecting his parents, or the future he wanted, or something that told him what he needed most. What he saw was himself. Just himself. Standing straight, wand in hand, looking back. No additional figures. No treasure. No completion of longing. Just Harry Potter, undistorted, exactly as he was. He looked at his reflection for a long moment, in the warm orange light of the fire, the warmth of the room pressing in after the cold of Quirrell's absence. Then the darkness took him, because his body had opinions about shock and pain, and apparently those opinions were due, and he let them win, because he had done what he came to do and the rest could wait. He woke up in the hospital wing. He knew before he opened his eyes because of the smell, potions and clean linen and the particular sterile warmth of a room that has been consistently cared for, and when he opened his eyes the ceiling was stone and the light was afternoon and someone was sitting in the chair beside the bed. Dumbledore. Harry looked at him. Harry, Dumbledore said, and the word came out with an uncharacteristic heaviness, the weight of a man who has been sitting with something for a while. The stone, Harry said. Destroyed, Dumbledore said. Nicholas Flamel and I agreed it was the only course. It was the right decision, even at the cost. A pause. You stopped him. Whatever remained of Voldemort, his connection to this body, this year's attempt, is severed. He is not gone. But he is set back further than he expected. Quirrell, Harry said. Was gone before you were, Dumbledore said quietly. You didn't. What happened to him was the choice of the thing that had been living in him. Not yours. Harry was quiet for a moment. He accepted this not as absolution but as accurate, which was different but sufficient. Ron, he said. Awake. 3 beds down. Madame Pomfrey is pretending to be exasperated by him, which means she is relieved. Dumbledore's voice had something in it that was almost warmth, almost the affection it usually performed, except that underneath it now there was something more earned. Miss Granger is in the chair he refuses to vacate. She has brought books. Harry looked down at his right hand. The knuckles were bandaged, the palm wrapped. It didn't hurt, Pomfrey's work, but he could feel the shape of the bandaging, the care of it. The mirror showed me myself, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I know. That is the protection working exactly as intended. He paused. But it is also, I think, accurate. It showed you what you most wanted. He met Harry's eyes. You wanted to be yourself. After everything. Still. Harry looked at the ceiling for a moment. The ratification vote, he said. Is in 5 days, Dumbledore said. You should rest. I'll be fine in 2. Madame Pomfrey will have opinions, Harry agreed. She usually does. He turned his head to look at Dumbledore directly. You came here yourself. You didn't send McGonagall. No. Why? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of a man choosing between the answer that sounded right and the answer that was true. Because I wanted to see for myself that you were all right, he said. And because I owed you the courtesy of being here when you woke up, since I was not here for many of the mornings I should have been. He paused. I am aware that saying so does not change what was. I'm saying it anyway. Harry looked at him. The afternoon light came through the high windows and made the dust motes visible in the air between them, and the hospital wing was very quiet. "I know," Harry said. "Thank you for coming." He meant it. Not as forgiveness. Forgiveness was a longer, more complex process, and Harry was 11 and honest enough to know he wasn't there yet. But as acknowledgement of the gesture, which was real, and as recognition that the man was doing the work he'd said in the rain-wet October air outside the Quidditch pitch he was trying to do. Messier than the performance. More real for it. "Go tell Ron and Hermione I'm awake," Harry said. "Or he'll be over here in approximately 30 seconds anyway." As if on cue, 3 beds down, Ron's voice said, "Harry. You awake? I can hear you talking." Harry laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from the base of the chest, unexpected, the laugh of someone who has been very close to something very serious and has come out the other side and finds, in the gap between what just happened and what comes next, the uncomplicated gladness of being alive. Dumbledore stood, and something on his face was not the practiced warmth of authority well used but the genuine feeling of a man who is watching something he had a hand in nearly destroying turn out better than he deserved. He left. Ron arrived. Hermione was 30 seconds behind him with 3 books and a glass of water and an expression that went from tightly managed anxiety to something considerably warmer when she saw Harry sitting up and lucid. "You absolute," she started. "I'm fine," Harry said. "You grabbed Voldemort, part of Voldemort, with your bare hand. It worked," Harry said. She sat in Dumbledore's vacated chair and looked at him with the expression of someone who has decided that arguing about methodology with someone who has just succeeded is both futile and inappropriate. "Yes," she said. "It did work." A pause. "You could have woken us. There wasn't time." "Next time there will be time because you will make time," she said. "That is not a request." "Seconded," Ron said, sitting on the edge of Harry's bed with the comfortable assumption of someone for whom physical proximity is a natural expression of affection. "What was it like?" "The whole, Voldemort in the room thing." Harry thought about it. The fire, the mirror, the voice using Quirrell's mouth. The cold of the thing that left. The mirror showing him himself. "Manageable," he said. Ron looked at him. Then he laughed too, not the polished laugh of someone performing amusement but the helpless kind, the "what are you even like" kind, the kind that meant "I am so glad you're all right." Hermione pressed her lips together to suppress her own smile and lost the battle after about 2 seconds. Outside the hospital wing windows, the 1st of December's snow was beginning, fine and light, the kind that doesn't commit but suggests, covering the grounds in a thin white that made the lake look like hammered silver and the forest look like an illustration from a book where everything is beautiful and slightly dangerous. Harry looked at the snow and felt it, felt all of it, the full weight of the year that had brought him here. The Gringotts vault and the witness stone. Finch's mustard robes and Ragnarok's waiting patience. The Wisengamot chamber and Marchbank's nod. Dumbledore's admission and Fudge's terrible color and Ogden's deliberate language. Ron moving his knight. Hermione's bluebell flames. The mirror of Eriste showing Harry Potter to Harry Potter, undistorted, sufficient, himself. He had not been convenient this year. He had not been small. He had been exactly what he was in every room he had walked into, and the rooms had had to accommodate him, and that was the right order of things. Voldemort was still out there. The Sirius Black Review was in progress. The ratification vote was 5 days away. There was a whole magical war being slowly, inevitably warmed back to life somewhere in the space between the present and the future. There was so much still to do. Harry leaned back against his pillows and listened to Ron talking and the snow falling and the hospital wing's particular quiet, and he was, for this precise moment, satisfied. The rest would come when it came. He would be ready. Chapter 6, The Heir of Potter. The ratification vote was on a Wednesday. Harry knew the exact moment it happened because he was in Charms when it did, sitting beside Ron in the 3rd row, practicing Wingardium Leviosa on a set of increasingly stubborn feathers, when Flitwick paused mid-demonstration and looked at the window with the expression of a man who has just heard something in the distance that others haven't registered yet. His ears, Harry had noticed, were slightly more sensitive than a human's baseline, a detail he had filed away in September and never found a reason to use until now. The owls came at 11:43. Not to the classroom, to the school generally, a wave of them descending on Hogwarts from the direction of London in a formation that Hermione, who saw them through the window first, later described as organized rather than coincidental. The first owl reached Harry specifically during the lunch break, dropping a letter from Finch onto the Gryffindor table with the clipped precision of express post. Harry opened it while Ron was loading his plate. The letter was one paragraph. Finch's handwriting, which was normally precise to the point of being austere, had a quality of contained energy to it that Harry recognized as his solicitor's version of excitement. Ratification passed. 41-16, 7 abstentions. The findings stand in full, censure confirmed, Supreme Mugwump Authority suspended pending Authority Scope Review, Wisengamot seat suspended for same period. Black case formally escalated to full DMLE review under Magical Law Enforcement Senior Investigator Amelia Bones. Ministry has been formally notified of Muggle liaison referral for the Dursley matter. Andromeda Tonks has been given legal guardianship effective the 1st of July. Your parents will is executed. Come and see me in the holidays. AF. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his robe pocket, and picked up his fork, and started eating. Ron watched him from across a heaping plate of shepherd's pie. Well. It passed, Harry said. Ron set down his fork. Then picked it up again. Then set it down again. It actually, all of it. All of it. Hermione, who had been sitting close enough to read over Harry's shoulder without technically reading over his shoulder, closed the book she had opened beside her plate and said nothing for a moment. Then, Amelia Bones is heading the Black Review. Is that good? Ron said. It's very good, Hermione said. She's the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She doesn't take cases personally unless she thinks they matter. She looked at Harry. Harry, this is actually everything you asked for. I know, Harry said. Ron looked at him with the particular expression he wore when Harry's reactions to large events didn't match the size of the event. You're very calm. I'm hungry, Harry said. And I've been waiting for this for 5 months. Calm is what you get after 5 months of machinery. Ron looked at his plate and then back at Harry. Right, he said. Then he smiled, the wide, uncomplicated Weasley smile that involved his whole face, and said, 41-16 is not close. That's not a narrow vote. That's a statement. 41-16, Harry agreed, and allowed himself to feel it properly for exactly as long as it took to eat a very good plate of shepherd's pie, which was about 12 minutes, and which felt exactly right. Dumbledore called no assembly. He sent no formal communication to the school. What he did was teach, or rather, continue to teach, though he had no regular classes, appearing in the History of Magic corridor on Thursday morning to give an impromptu lecture on the Goblin Wars to a group of bewildered second-years who had been expecting the monotone of Professor Binns and got something considerably more engaged. He was at every meal. He moved through the castle with the same unhurried pace as always, stopped to talk to students in corridors, managed peeves with his usual oblique authority. He was doing what Harry had told him to do, Harry realized. He was being the headmaster. Not the supreme mugwump. Not the political force. Just the man who ran a school and knew the names of every portrait on the 7th floor and occasionally left lemon drops on the windowsills of students who he thought were having difficult weeks. On Thursday evening, Harry passed him on the 4th floor staircase. Dumbledore was coming down, Harry was going up, and they met in the middle where the staircase had one of its inexplicable stone landings. Dumbledore stopped. Harry stopped. The vote, Dumbledore said. I know. I imagine you're satisfied. Harry thought about the word. "I'm satisfied the process worked," he said. "I don't think I feel satisfied about the reason it needed to." Dumbledore absorbed this without deflecting it, which was the new thing, the thing Harry was still calibrating, the headmaster who received things directly rather than transmuting them through wisdom and distance. "That's a fair distinction," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise." "The Black Review," Harry said. "You're going to cooperate with Bones." It was not a question. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, and then said, fully. "Whatever she needs. I should have pushed for a trial in 1981 and I did not, and I intend to say so in writing to her office before the week is out." "Good," Harry said. He moved to continue up the staircase. "Harry." He stopped. Dumbledore's voice had the particular quality of someone reaching for something they don't entirely have language for yet. "I have been thinking about what you said. In my office in October. About good intentions and the gap between what a person wants to do and what is right." "What about it?" "I have been thinking," Dumbledore said, "that I am not the first person who needed to hear it. I am thinking that I should have heard it 20, perhaps 30 years earlier, and I am wondering who might have said it, had I been receptive." He paused. "I think your mother might have, eventually. She was not afraid of me, which was unusual. Most people are, though they don't always realize it. She simply found me insufficient, sometimes, and she said so." Harry looked at him on the stone landing in the castle torchlight. "She sounds like she was extraordinary," Harry said. "She was," Dumbledore said quietly. "You should know that. Whatever else has been complicated, that is simple and true." Harry nodded and continued up the stairs, and behind him the staircase did what Hogwarts staircases did and swung sideways, taking him somewhere slightly different from where he intended to go, which in this case turned out to be a corridor with a window overlooking the grounds, and he stopped and looked out at the December dark and the snow-covered grounds and the black sky enormous above the lake. His mother. 21 years old, writing a will in her own blood. Adding an addendum 3 days before she died because she could see what was coming. Hiding a stone in a blanket because she could not stop the thing from happening but she could make sure the truth of it survived. He pressed his hand flat against the cold stone window ledge and let himself feel it, really feel it, without managing it or filing it or converting it into anything strategic. Just the plain, enormous fact of a woman who had loved him so completely and so specifically that the love had outlasted her by 11 years and had still, at the end, done exactly what she meant it to do. He stood at the window for a while. Then he went to find Ron and Hermione, because they would be in the common room, and because that was where he wanted to be. The holidays emptied the castle beautifully. Harry stayed. He had stayed because Andromeda Tonks had written him a letter, a real letter, not a legal document, handwritten on cream paper in a looping generous script, saying that if he wished to visit over Christmas she would very much like to meet him, and if he was not ready for that yet she understood completely, and that either way she wanted him to know that she had been his parents' friend and that this was not an obligation or a duty but an invitation, given freely, with no expectation. He had read it 4 times and then written back to say he would visit at New Year, because Christmas felt like a thing he wanted to spend learning what Hogwarts was like when it was quiet, and New Year felt like the right time to start something new. He sent the reply by School Owl, and Andromeda's response came back in 48 hours, and it said, "New Year is perfect. I'll make a dinner that would embarrass a professional chef. My daughter Nymphadora insists on helping, which I allow because she's enthusiastic even when the results are catastrophic. We'll see you on the 1st. Andromeda." Harry read catastrophic and laughed, the base of the chest kind, and tacked the letter to the inside of his trunk because he didn't have a better place for things he wanted to keep nearby. The castle at Christmas was a revelation. 12 trees in the great hall, enchanted snow on the stone floors that vanished before it could be slippery, the professors visibly more relaxed in the way of people who had temporarily been released from the performance of authority. McGonagall played chess with Harry on Christmas afternoon and won twice and lost once, and the once she lost she looked at the board with an expression of genuine reassessment before saying, simply, "You've been practicing. Ron's been teaching me." Ron Weasley plays like his father, she said. Solidly. You play like someone who learned from Ron Weasley and then kept going. She began resetting the pieces with the precise movements of a woman who respects the board enough to maintain it. You should know, Mr. Potter, that I submitted a formal letter to the inquiry committee in support of the ratification. Harry looked up. I didn't know that. You weren't supposed to. It wasn't for your benefit, I mean that in the most literal way. I submitted it because it was accurate and because I should have submitted something similar 10 years ago, before any of this was necessary. She set down the last piece with a small click. I was aware, when you were placed with your aunt, that it was not what your parents would have chosen. I was not aware of the full content of the will, but I was aware of the principle. I said nothing because Albus was certain, and when Albus Dumbledore is certain, the people around him tend to become uncertain of their own doubts. She met his eyes directly. That is not an excuse. I know, Harry said. Then, thank you. For the letter. And for saying this. Another game, she said. Yes, he said. She won the second one in 11 moves and seemed pleased about it in the way of someone reassured that the world still makes sense in at least one respect. Snape found him in the library on the 28th. Harry was reading, not homework, since the holidays had temporarily relieved him of any obligation to homework, but a book Ragnarok had sent him through the Gringotts post, a detailed history of magical estate law that was considerably more interesting than its title suggested. He heard Snape's footsteps before he registered the man, that particular quality of footstep, deliberate and slightly theatrical, and looked up without surprise. Snape stood at the end of the library aisle and looked at him with those black, entirely unreadable eyes and said nothing for a moment. Professor, Harry said. Potter, Snape said. He moved to the table and sat, not across from Harry but at the end, the angle of someone who is not joining a conversation so much as establishing proximity to one. He had no book. His hands were flat on the table. He looked, Harry thought, like a man who had made a decision and was not entirely comfortable with it but was going to carry it through anyway. I want to speak to you about the events in June. It's December, Harry said. The events that occurred in June of next year, Snape said, flatly, are not available for discussion. I am speaking about the events of last month. A pause. The third floor. Harry set down his book. Okay. I was aware that Quirrell had turned, Snape said. I had been aware since October. I was managing the situation, monitoring, attempting to determine the full extent of what was occupying him, and simultaneously attempting to prevent him from reaching the stone while I gathered sufficient evidence to present to the headmaster. I know, Harry said. I saw you counter-cursing during the Quidditch match. Snape looked at him for a moment. Something moved in his expression, not warmth, not quite, but a fractional softening of the perpetual edge of it. You saw that. You were watching Quirrell in the stands. You were muttering. The broom stopped misbehaving. Harry met his gaze. Thank you for that, by the way. I was not, Snape started, with the reflex of someone about to say doing it for you, and then appeared to stop himself from finishing the sentence, because finishing it would have required dishonesty. He was silent for a moment. What I am saying is that you intervened before I had concluded my assessment of the situation. You went down to that corridor without informing anyone, without backup beyond 2 first-year students, and you confronted a partially destroyed dark wizard with your bare hands. It worked, Harry said. It worked, Snape agreed, and the way he said it communicated very clearly that working and being a reasonable plan were not synonyms. I want you to understand, and I'm aware this may be the first time I have said something to you that is not specifically designed to evaluate your potion's competency, that what you encountered in that room was not merely the remnant of a man. What rides hosts, what uses people the way it used Quirrell, is not weakened by fragmentation in the ways you might assume. It is, in certain respects, more dangerous. Less constrained by the usual requirements of, he paused. Of having a body. You're telling me not to underestimate him, Harry said. I am telling you, Snape said, very precisely, that whatever you felt in that room, whatever certainty allowed you to act the way you acted, I would like you to keep it. Do not let anyone talk you out of it. Including me. Including Dumbledore. A pause so slight it was almost not there. Including yourself. Harry looked at him. At the face that was not performing anything in this moment, not contempt, not authority, not the elaborate performance of dislike that Harry had been watching since September and cataloguing as something more complex than it presented. What was under all of that was a face that had been afraid of something for a very long time and had organized an entire personality around managing that fear. You knew my mother, Harry said. Snape was very still. I'm not asking about it, Harry said. I just know. The way you look at my face when you think I'm not watching. You look for her. He kept his voice level, not gentle, not probing, just steady and factual in the way that had served him all year. I don't mind. I look for her too, when I can. The library was very quiet. Snow against the high windows. Somewhere in the stacks, a book reshelved itself with a soft thump. She was, Snape said, and stopped. Started again. She was the most remarkable person I have ever known. He said it as a fact, stripped of everything except accuracy. I failed her in ways that I am not going to discuss with her 11-year-old son. But I want you to know, I want you to understand that whatever you believe about my motivations in this castle, whatever your assessment of my character, which I am aware is not high, I am not your enemy. I am not your ally in any simple sense. But I am not your enemy. I know, Harry said. Snape looked at him. I've known since September, Harry said. I'm very good at telling enemies from complicated people who are doing the right thing badly. Something passed through Snape's face too quickly to name. He stood, straightened his robes, and looked at the book Harry had been reading. Estate law, he said. Diligent. Ragnarok sent it. Of course he did. He turned to leave. Then, without turning back, your mother would have enjoyed watching you this year, Potter. She would have been insufferably proud. A pause. Don't tell anyone I said that. He left. Harry sat with it for a moment, and then picked up his book and kept reading, because the pages were good and the library was warm and outside the snow was doing the committed kind now, covering the grounds properly, and there was nothing else he needed to do right now except be here, in this place that was his, reading a book sent by a goblin who had been patient for 11 years. New Year's Day arrived cold and bright. Andromeda Tonks lived in a house in Kent that had clearly been expanded internally beyond what its exterior suggested, the way magical homes often are. From the road it looked like a pleasant but unremarkable cottage, and through the front door it opened into something considerably more generous and warmer. It smelled like cooking and like wood fires and like a house where people actually lived in all the rooms rather than keeping some for show. Nymphadora Tonks was 21 years old and met him at the door with her hair bright orange because she had apparently changed it on the way to the door and was still deciding whether orange was the right choice. She looked at him for a moment and then said, "Watch her, Harry," with the ease of someone who has already decided to like you and sees no reason to make it complicated. "Watch her," Harry said, because it seemed like the right response. She grinned. Her hair went pink. "Come in, then. Mum's been cooking since yesterday, which means the kitchen is either extraordinary or a disaster. She refuses to let me see until it's done, which I personally think bodes ill." Andromeda came out of the kitchen to meet him in the hallway, and Harry had not known what to expect, had built no particular picture, because building pictures in advance of important things was a habit he had been trying to break, and what he found was a woman in her mid-40s with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that was structured and careful and contained something. When she looked at him, that was the expression of someone trying to hold a large feeling at a manageable level. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at her. "You look like James," she said. "Everyone says your mother's eyes. But you stand the way James stood." She paused. "That's not a criticism. James Potter stood like he was waiting to do something useful. It was one of his better qualities. That's how Dumbledore described her, Harry said. Standing like she was waiting. They'd both have been annoyed to know they were that similar, Andromeda said, and the smile that came with it was both warm and specific, the smile of someone accessing something real. She extended her hand and he shook it and she said, I should have been there 10 years ago. I'm sorry I wasn't. You weren't told, Harry said. I should have asked, she said. I should have kept asking until someone told me. I thought, it was wartime, and people were frightened, and Dumbledore seemed so certain, and she stopped. None of those are good enough reasons and I know they're not. No, Harry agreed. But they're real reasons, and you're saying them honestly, which is more than most people manage. He paused. I'd like to start from now. She looked at him again with that careful, assessing quality, and it occurred to Harry that she and Ragnarok shared something, the patience of people who have learned to take the measure of things before committing to them, and who, once they commit entirely. Starting from now sounds right, she said. Come eat. Dora, stop showing off with your hair, it's putting the guests off their appetite. It's festive, Tonks said, from the doorway, her hair now a cheerful combination of gold and red that was either a New Year's gesture or a Gryffindor solidarity gesture or simply the default aesthetic of someone who could change their appearance at will and found the ability impossible to resist. Dinner was extraordinary. Andromeda had not been lying about her competency. There was a roast lamb with herbs that smelled like something from a restaurant that took reservations, roasted vegetables that had clearly been treated as seriously as the main course, a bread that Tonks admitted she had actually been allowed to make and which was, against expectations, very good. They sat around a table that was the right size for people to actually talk across and they talked. Andromeda told him about his parents, not the legendary versions, not the hero versions, but the real ones. James, who had been terribly arrogant at 15 and had grown out of it by force of Lily's refusal to tolerate it, and who had been generous and funny and occasionally reckless in ways that were not always charming. Lily, who had been the sharpest person in any room she walked into and had known it and had done the hard work of making sure that never made her unkind. The two of them together, which had been, Andromeda said, one of those rare combinations that was genuinely better than the sum of its parts, each of them made more themselves by the presence of the other. Harry listened to every word. He ate well. He asked questions, real questions, specific ones, the kind that came from wanting to know rather than from performing interest. Tonks told him about being a metamorphmagus, which she had discovered at 7 and which her mother had responded to with the composed practicality of a woman who had already decided that whatever her daughter turned out to be was going to be fine. She demonstrated 3 facial configurations that were increasingly abstract and made Harry laugh genuinely enough that Andromeda looked pleased. After dinner, when Tonks was performing an entirely unnecessary but very entertaining series of impression-based transformations for her own satisfaction, Andromeda and Harry sat by the fire with tea, and she said, the guardianship transfer becomes official in July. You'll stay here after term, at least for this summer, and we'll see from there. I'm not, I want to be honest with you, Harry. I'm not trying to replace anything. I'm not trying to perform a family at you. I'm just opening my house and you can make of it what you want. That's all I want, Harry said. Something that's actually mine. Then that's what it is, she said simply. She did not cry. He did not cry. They both looked at the fire for a moment, in the way of people who have understood each other quickly and are comfortable with that fact. The Black Review, Harry said. Serious. Do you think he did it? Andromeda was quiet for a moment, with the quality of someone who has thought about this question for a very long time without a clean answer available. I think, she said carefully, that Sirius Black loved your parents more than he loved anything in the world. I think that's true. And I have always thought, that a man who loved like that doesn't betray like that. But I also know that people are complicated and that 12 years is a long time and that I wasn't there that night. Amelia Bones is heading the review, Harry said. I know. I've already sent her a statement. She looked at him over her teacup. Whatever the review finds, Sirius deserved a trial. That much is simply true. Yes, Harry said. They sat in the fire's warmth and talked until midnight, and Tonks set off what she described as traditional New Year fireworks that were technically unauthorized within a Muggle residential area but were sufficiently contained within the garden that this seemed like a problem for another day, and Harry stood on the cold grass and watched green and gold light bloom above the hedge and felt something he could finally, cleanly name. He felt at home. Not in the nostalgic sense, not the warm golden memory sense of a home he had lost. In the present tense, the immediate tense. Standing in a garden in Kent in the cold first minutes of a new year, with fireworks going off above him and a woman in the house who had said whatever you want it to be and meant it, Harry Potter felt at home for the first time in his living memory. He looked up at the fireworks. He let himself have it. He was back at Hogwarts on the 3rd, because the train ran on the 2nd and he had wanted one full day in the castle's New Year quiet before term resumed. He sat in the common room in the late afternoon, the only Gryffindor there, and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Finch. Arcturus, thank you for everything this year. All of it. I'd like to begin looking at Sirius Black's case file as soon as you're able to access what Bones has. Not to interfere, just to understand. I want to know what actually happened that night. Also, the estate, I'd like to begin being properly involved in its management. Ragnarok says I can take a more active role from 12 onward. I turn 12 in July. I want to be ready. Harry. The second was to Ragnarok. Ragnarok, I've been reading the estate law book. I have questions, starting on page 147, the inheritance trust provisions. Could we schedule time in the Easter holiday? Also, thank you for waiting. I know you waited for a long time. Harry Potter. He sent them by School Owl and sat back and watched the fire. In his trunk upstairs, the photograph of his parents laughing. The certified copy of the will, his mother's italics, his father's handwriting, the blood seal at the bottom that had been waiting for 11 years for someone to care that it existed. The letter from Andromeda tacked to the inside of the lid. Finch's first letter, about time, that he had kept because it was the first time an adult had said that to him and meant it as a rallying call. He understood now, been building something all year. Not just a legal case, not just a response to a grievance. Something more fundamental, the architecture of a life that was actually his, constructed on the foundation of what his parents had tried to leave him rather than the structure of what someone else had decided he should be. The architecture was not finished. It would be a long time before it was finished. Voldemort was still out there, wounded and furious and not done. The war that had been paused 11 years ago was winding back towards something, and Harry was at the center of it in a way that he did not yet fully understand and was not going to pretend to. There was a prophecy he hadn't heard, a godfather in Azkaban who might be innocent, a magical world that was still learning what to do with the information that its most famous orphan had opinions and intentions and was not going to stand in the background and be convenient. There was so much still to do. He was 11 years old, nearly 12, and he had already sat in a Wisengamot chamber and told 50 people in plum robes the plain truth about his life, and the machinery had moved, and the truth had held its shape, the way his mother had believed it would when she sealed it with her blood. He had been afraid of nothing all year. He intended to keep it that way. The owls started arriving on the 4th, when term was back and the school was full again and the post came with breakfast as it always did, a cascade of birds descending on the great hall in their usual morning cacophony. What was unusual was the volume. Not owls to Harry specifically, owls to the school broadly, students receiving copies of the morning's Daily Prophet and the wizarding wireless transcript in the numbers that meant something had broken overnight. Harry received his copy from the school post owl and opened it with one hand while pouring pumpkin juice with the other. The front page was not about him. It was about Sirius Black. Specifically, it was about a statement released by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at 11 o'clock the previous evening, under Amelia Bones' signature, confirming that the preliminary review of the Sirius Black conviction had identified what it described as material procedural failures including the absence of a formal trial, the absence of a recorded Veritaserum interrogation, and the existence of at least one witness account that had not been included in the original case file. The statement confirmed that a full review was underway and that Black's continued detention was, the phrase was careful but unmistakable, under active re-examination. Ron made a sound beside him. Hermione had her own copy up and was reading intently. Material procedural failures, Hermione said. That's, Harry, that's Bones saying out loud that the conviction might not hold. I know, Harry said. This is moving faster than Finch said it would. Bones is thorough, Harry said. When she decides something matters, she moves. He had read everything publicly available about Amelia Bones in October, after she was named in the escalation order. She was the kind of person who, once she picked up a thread, did not put it down until she had followed it to the end. He had been counting on that. Ron was quiet for a moment, reading the article. Then, Harry. If Black gets out, if he's actually innocent, he's your godfather. Yes, Harry said. You'd have another guardian option. Beyond Tonks. I know. You're not, that's not. Ron looked at him with the expression of someone doing the arithmetic on something complicated. You're not going to drop Andromeda for Black if he gets out, are you? Because she's been, from what you've said, she's been, no, Harry said immediately. Andromeda is, that's real, and it's mine, and it stays. If Sirius gets out, if he's innocent, that's a different thing. That's someone else my parents chose for me who got taken away. Both things can be true. He looked at Ron steadily. I have room. Ron looked at him. Then nodded, once, with the completeness of someone who has checked and found the answer satisfactory. Hermione was still reading. Dumbledore submitted a statement to Bones' review, she said. The Prophet has excerpts. He names Peter Pettigrew as the actual secret keeper. She looked up. He's saying Sirius was framed. The great hall noise continued around them, the ordinary Tuesday morning chaos of several hundred students eating breakfast and arguing about homework and performing the thousand small negotiations of communal life. Somewhere down the table, a group of third years were discussing the Prophet article with the energetic certainty of people who have just received interesting news. At the staff table, McGonagall was reading her own copy with an expression that was entirely still. Dumbledore's chair was empty, which meant he had already seen the morning paper. Harry folded his copy and set it beside his plate. Peter Pettigrew. The name meant nothing to him directly, but it was in the documents, in his parents' letters from that last year, in Finch's research notes, as a peripheral figure, a friend, a member of his parents' circle who had died the same night Sirius was arrested. Died, supposedly, in the confrontation. Body not fully recovered. He filed it. There were loose threads here that would need following. He was not going to pull at them today, in the breakfast noise, without proper preparation. He ate his toast. He had learned, this year, the essential discipline of knowing when to act and when to wait. The machinery was moving, Bones had it, Dumbledore had contributed to it, the review was underway. His intervention now would muddy the water rather than clarify it. He would contact Finch at the weekend. He would ask Ragnarok to compile whatever Gringotts held that was relevant to the Black estate and guardianship records. He would read everything that was readable and understand everything that was understandable, and then he would decide what, if anything, he needed to do. One thing at a time. He was good at one thing at a time. On the last day of January, Harry received a letter from Andromeda. It was shorter than her usual letters. She was a thorough correspondent, detailed and warm in the way of someone who had spent 20 years writing carefully because writing was how she maintained the relationships that mattered to her. This one was 4 sentences. Harry, I imagine you've seen the Prophet. I wanted to say, whatever comes next with Sirius, whatever the review finds, I hope you know that my door is not conditional. If he comes back into your life, he belongs there. So does this house. Both things can be true. Andromeda. He read it and thought, she already knew what I was going to think before I thought it. He wrote back, I know. Thank you for saying it anyway. Harry. He sent it and went to Quidditch practice in the February cold, where Wood had organized a training session that was aggressively thorough even by Wood's standards, and Harry flew for 2 hours in the grey Scottish sky with the particular happiness of someone who has discovered a thing they genuinely love and is doing it well, the cold irrelevant, the castle below warm and lit in the late afternoon dark. He caught the snitch in the final drill so fast that Wood made him demonstrate the approach technique 3 times for the rest of the team, which Harry did patiently because Wood's enthusiasm was genuine even when it was slightly excessive. Afterward, flying back to the pitch, Harry held the snitch in his bandaged right hand, the hand that had held Quirrell's wrist, that had worn his mother's protection like a second skin, and felt the tiny wings flutter against his palm, alive and trying to get away, the way important things always were. He opened his hand. The snitch hovered for a moment, wings blurring, suspended in the cold air between them. Then he closed his hand again, because this was practice and Wood wanted it back, and the metaphor was sufficient without being labored. He landed. He went inside. He was Harry Potter, son of James and Lily, who had loved him enough to seal that love in blood and stone so that it could survive them and find him eventually. Heir to an estate that was finally, actually his. Ward of a woman who had said whatever you wanted to be. Best friend to a boy who moved his night without being asked and a girl who brought research to a crisis at midnight. Student of a school that was teaching him every day what it meant to be powerful in a world that was paying attention. The war was coming. He had not forgotten that. Voldemort was out there in some diminished, furious form, regrouping, and Harry was in the shape of whatever prophecy Dumbledore was still holding close, and none of that was resolved or settled or done. But Harry Potter walked through the doors of Hogwarts in the February dark, into the warmth and noise and light of it, and he was not afraid of anything that was coming. He was ready for it. He was, finally, entirely himself. And that, he had learned this year, was everything.